It's the easiest option just to hit the big red button and print some extra money.
When you're saying the obesity epidemic is related to the corruption of money, opiate addiction epidemic is related to the corruption of money, people don't put two and two together.
It's very easy to look at the history books and you see wheelbarrows full of cash. That's obviously going to fail. We don't have wheelbarrows full of cash here. We have Jerome Powell adding as many zeros as he wants to the balance sheet. People spend their lives and invest their economic energy into reinforcing a system to then knock on the door and say, by the way, you're completely wrong.
Your whole life is a lie.
Your whole life is a lie. Like, what an opening line.
You've created this brilliant video that explains the nature of money.
Someone sent me a really long email. Bitcoin was this separation within the family. He was so passionate about it, but nobody else would understand why. He shared the video with his teenage daughter, and then after they had the best conversation we've ever had. Once you realize it's inevitable, there's no point spending time on anything else.
You've created this brilliant video that explains the nature of money and the consequences of printing money from first principles using a very approachable, calm video. It's titled, "What's the Problem?"
Yeah.
So it seems like a great natural first question. What is the problem?
Well, the nice thing about it is that when I gave the presentation the very first time, I intentionally didn't tell them what it was about. And it means that people have their guard down. Yeah, because if I'd gone and said, "Oh, this is a video about Bitcoin," immediately you're losing a portion of the audience. And so, the problem is that the government has a big red button. And the answer is, the solution is, we need the separation of money and state. And the idea here is, can we get somebody from zero knowledge to that obvious conclusion within 30 minutes and therefore want to learn about Bitcoin? And yeah, I've just been delighted about how it's landed and the amount of just natural sharing that has happened from within the Bitcoin community. And we've just sat and watched it, and you watched it for the very first time.
Yeah.
And
40 minutes, you said?
Yeah, with the couple of minutes at the start and end to intro it. Because, but having seen that, there's probably nothing in there that you didn't know already.
No, that's exactly what I said to you at the conclusion of the video. It is compiling and crystallizing all the problems that Bitcoiners talk about and connect back to the corruption of money. But many people that are outside of Bitcoiner circles find those to be tenuous connections, right? When you're saying the obesity epidemic is related to the corruption of money, or the opiate addiction epidemic is related to the corruption of money, even forever war is related to the corruption of money, which is a bit more of a direct link. People don't put two and two together. It is this giant blind spot for the human race, and a point of major frustration, I think, for Bitcoiners.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, maybe that would be useful, is like, well, first of all, you've said the big red button, so maybe we talk about what that is.
Yeah.
And then what are the cascading negative consequences of pressing that big red button, and how does that feed back on itself in a self-reinforcing negative way?
Yeah. Well, I mean, within the video, the island effectively splits, and on one side you have the Satoshis and one side the Fiatellas, and they start as being identical, perfect money, but then you have this big red button attached that you can change things. And Fiatello gradually gets to the point where it's the easiest option just to hit the big red button and print some extra money. But, we all know from the history books about what happens when you print money, and, there are no good outcomes there. But we sort of have this sort of mental disassociation between that and what is happening today. Because it's very easy to look at the history books and just see a chart of the Weimar Republic and be like, okay, well, that's obviously going to fail. That's obviously wrong. And you see wheelbarrows full of cash. Yeah. But we don't have wheelbarrows full of cash here. We have, Jerome Powell adding as many zeros as he wants to the balance sheet. It's exactly the same. It's just that money doesn't necessarily end up in the streets.
Yeah.
And so
It's actually worse because it's produced more quickly, more easily. You don't even have to print it. Actually, you just punch in the data.
Exactly, and it's obfuscated from the public. The public don't know that it's happening, and B, have no real way of identifying whether it's happening at all, because it's so complicated. Even you have, wonderful Bitcoiners come on and, you'll do podcasts and they'll explain the financial system, the different types of money creation, and it is complicated. Yeah. Imagine trying to convey that to somebody who has no financial background. For most Bitcoiners, it's borderline inaccessible, right? Because it's terminology which is bespoke and these sorts of things, and hidden behind, mechanisms that themselves require explaining because they're not natural.
Yeah, which seems to be by design, right? That the jargon is intended to obfuscate the reality, right? Yeah. So then you can get these fiat economists acting like high priest of some sort, right? Like they speak some kind of special language or have some kind of special understanding. And it's all bullshit. It's all smoke and mirrors, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it's like you're just monopolizing the most important good in the marketplace, which is money, and you're printing it, which is allotting new units to yourself without doing any work. And then that can be used to acquire things that do require work. Yep. So as you say in the video, it's just this sophisticated, shrouded form of industrialized theft.
It is. And that's how it rolls downhill. Yeah. But trying to convey to somebody who has no background in this how any of that works is impossible. And so what I tried to do in the video was just abstract the whole thing away and be like, there's just a big red button and you press it and more cash comes out. Because effectively that's what it is. Yeah. I mean, once you are motivated to learn more, you can then go down first level, second level, all the way down. But very few people go all the way down because you just don't need to, right? Unless you have a particular interest in it. But by abstracting it to the big red button, you're not losing any of the validity in it. Correct. You're just removing it from necessary consideration, given you're trying to achieve something in 30 minutes. But, there's a flow chart in there and the chart's on screen for like 10, 15 minutes.
But sorry, before that, I really liked how the beginning of the video, you said, what's the problem? And you name all these problems that are occurring throughout society, right? And again, they're disparate, right? Like you said, the few that come to mind, the obesity epidemic, I think addiction was in there, forever wars, homelessness,
cost of living,
wealth inequality. There were 10 or 12, I think, bubbles up there. Yeah. And then you go into the flow chart of what happens when you print the big red button and walking through the cause and effect that actually generated each one of these bubbles that was answering the initial question of what's the problem. I really liked that continuity.
Well, my plan was to try and hook people up front. And, because they would recognize something on that screen as being relevant, touching them directly or indirectly. And then by going through the logical steps that we take in the video, you end up back at those problems naturally. And therefore, if you've watched the video and at each stage gone, yep, that's right. Yep, that's right. Yeah, that's right. And then you end up at the creation of the problem, you suddenly go, okay, all right. And then, we can talk about, needing to give people a framework in free market economics as well, which is sort of, I had to try and drip into that on one, as a prerequisite for understanding about, the increase in the value of money itself, because it's such a foreign concept now. Right. Such a foreign concept. Right. You have to sort of build it up from first principles. But then you have, effectively Jeff Booth's The Price of Tomorrow, a very poor imitation on one slide. But then just going through that process, everyone watching it is like, well, yeah, obviously. Obviously. Yeah. We're like, well, how have we ended up in a society where the outcomes are not the obvious outcomes, right? And then so you work through, and then you get to the realization that you just wouldn't want to hold these fiat tellers. You just wouldn't want to hold these fiat tellers at all, and you've already convinced yourself through your own logic, right? by the time you reach that point, and then it's the reveal comes in and it gets even worse.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, the question of like, how did we get to this point? I think it really shines light on how pernicious this corruption of money problem is, because this is not a consequence you went into directly in your video, but I think indirectly it comes out if you have a knowledge of Keynesian economics versus Austrian economics. But the fact that the purchasing power stolen through the printing of money can be used to finance this pseudoscientific post hoc rationalization of why the government needs to control the money printer, right? Which is Keynesian economics. Like it's just this, it's an academic, in big ass air quotes, pursuit that really just grounds out in the government controls the money, right? Government is God. Government issues money into circulation and takes it out. There's like it doesn't bear any opportunity cost. It doesn't talk about the actual incentives within the structure of government. It just has this sort of unquestioning belief or blind faith in the structure of government monopolizing and controlling the money.
Yep.
And so how pernicious is that, right? It's like you press the big red button and you talked about capturing like media, the military industrial complex, big pharma, et cetera, but it also captures university curriculum. So then you train all these economists to be like, rank and file, singing the song of fiat economics. And before you know it, after 2 or 3 generations, we're all just hypnotized. And we think, oh, inflation's normal. I like it when the price of things go up. If we don't print money, who's gonna save us during the pandemic? And all of this economic irrationality becomes imprinted in our consciousness.
Yeah. And I didn't include education on there. Mm-hmm. I was struggling for time. Mm-hmm. And I was also struggling for space, like what do I include and what do I not include? Mm-hmm. And the education sector is, from very small, obviously, all the way through to universities, the way that PhDs work, the way that funding works, is that, it's all effectively corrupted by the money now. Like you even just have to look at schools, and I can talk about from a UK perspective, but I imagine it's very similar over here. Mm-hmm. And you're not taught critical thinking. To any meaningful degree. There's no sense of questioning what you're being taught. You're not taught to understand money. You're not taught any financial skills whatsoever. But this is largely, it's a combination of the curriculum doesn't provision for it because the curriculum is directed by the government, but also the people who are teaching it don't have those skills either, because precisely from your point, this has been going on so long now. Yes. Any skills we did have been watered away.
Yes.
This is a second, third generation.
That's right.
And after so long, you just get used to your environment.
Sure.
You just get used to your environment. And inflation is just, it always shocks me. People just treat inflation as this it's always there. This thing, it's just natural.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's entirely unnatural.
Yeah.
Entirely unnatural.
Yeah.
And so by trying to help the viewer go through those processes of the unencumbered free market with perfect money, you just inevitably arrive at the situation where just with human action, prices go down and quality goes up.
Yes.
And quality of life rises for everybody.
Which is the whole point.
Yeah. And this is just everybody working in their own self-interest. It's, and Jeff Booth, he says like 8 billion people working in the service of 8 billion people.
Yeah.
But this is exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
The critical distinction there, right? Because when we say that everyone operating in their own individual self-interest, the critical distinction is that it is people doing that within the boundary conditions of private property.
Yes.
Right? Because you could argue that, people inside the government are also operating their own individual self-interest. That's why they're running this scam to print money and steal from people.
Yeah.
What they're violating is the principle of private property.
Absolutely. So the wider context for that quote is Bitcoin as the world's first free market, total free market, global money.
Yeah.
If we all had that, we would all be working in service of everybody else.
That's right.
And then this is what is wonderful about the free market and wonderful about Bitcoin is that you act in your own self-interest for the benefit of everybody else.
Yes.
Like there is no system
Right.
stronger than that.
Right.
Because it leverages the natural human action to make it unbreakable.
Yeah.
And so when you don't end up, you question now, why are we in the position that we are in? When that is natural, that is where we should be. And it just shows you the decline that we've ended up going through this constant pressing of the big red button.
Yeah.
And but you can only really do that, to your point, is if you can remove the ability of the population to push back on it, to understand what is really happening, because otherwise the system is gonna become unstable. Now we all know the system's unstable.
Yeah.
It's untenable in the long run, and the inevitable outcome is that fiat goes to zero.
Yeah.
Because the only solution they have available is pressing the big red button. It is inevitable.
Yes.
It is inevitable. So when you think about Bitcoin, it's like, well, if the thing it's getting measured in typically is going to zero purchasing power, Bitcoin's going up forever. And that is inevitable. And, people think, oh, well, it's hyperbole. It's like, but no, it's just logic. It's just logic.
Yeah.
And it's only a question of how long it takes and the path it takes for that to happen.
Yeah. Yeah. That's well said. And the term debasement is often used to describe this depreciation of the purchasing power of money. But the interesting thing about Bitcoin is that the debasement, there's a rippling effect of debasement that it extends far beyond the scope of just purchasing power, right? We start to have, as we just said with Keynesian economics, we have a debasement in our intellectual understanding of how economics works, right? We start running all of our global institutions based on Keynesian economics, and that doesn't make any sense, right? You get too big to fail. You get all these crazy asinine economic ideologies implemented. You get a debasement of social morality, right? Like people just desperate to get by, that they start more willingly engaging in lying, cheating, stealing, because, it's like what goes around comes around, right? They're being robbed. Their money is robbing them. So they become desperate, and desperate times call for desperate measures. Yeah. You get a debasement of social cohesion, right? Not only do you get these regional monopolies of currency counterfeiting, but you also get the wars between them, right? So we get debasement of physical capital, right? When buildings and cities start getting bombed, and it's incredible. And this seems to be that revelation that so many Bitcoiners have had and are so anxious to share with others. It's like, guys, this is the spiritual cancer on the planet. It's identifiable, right? Like we can, it's not just some woo-woo. Yeah. Right. There's an identifiable engineering problem that we now have a solution to.
It is just infectious. Yeah. And it infects and corrupts everything. Like every aspect of the way that we think about our lives today has been negatively impacted by this. And we're at a pretty dark point across a lot of the world with this, and I sit here in Miami with you, envious of the years that the US probably has in front of it now compared to the state that we find ourselves in the UK. But it gives me hope that there is this better option that people have. Yeah. Because imagine how we'd be thinking about the world if Bitcoin didn't exist.
Yeah, very bleak.
Very bleak, very bleak. And it's one of, in the same way that fiat money printing infects and corrodes everything, Bitcoin is the opposite.
Yeah. It's the inoculation.
It's the inoculation. Yeah. But it's almost more than that, because there's the personal aspect and there's also the societal aspect. It's absolutely the antidote for the societal aspect, coming from the the technical foundations and then what that means, what that then means, what that then means. But from an individual's perspective, and you can see this just by having conversations with people who have gone so far down the rabbit hole, is that Bitcoin brightens your life. Like it makes you hopeful for the future. Like it makes you, and we talk about short-term versus long-term time preferences. It makes you plan, and it makes you think about making better decisions for the future. It makes you reflect on the things you are doing wrong in your life.
Yeah.
Even if it's not related to money at all.
Yeah.
It's like this personal upgrade that you get. And that's even without thinking about the impact that it has from a functional, mechanical perspective on the rest of society. So you go and combine those two things. Like, can you imagine what sort of societal uplift we are inevitably going to unlock here?
Yeah.
And it's just the only question is the time and the path. But thinking into the future becomes very hard for people, especially when it's non-linear.
Yeah. Well, I would frame it that it enables you to have a relationship with more versions of your future self, right? Like more distant versions of your future self. Because before Bitcoin, you're just trying to survive the inflation that's on top of you right now, right? Like, how do I pay rent for the next 6 months or next year? And like, obviously it's a bit hyperbolic, right? People are in all different situations. There were rich people before Bitcoin that had longer time horizons and whatnot, but there is still this kind of zero-sum game bearing down on them, really, no matter who you are, as you lay out in the video, right? The poor are getting poorer every day. The middle class are becoming the new poor. The rich were death by 1,000 paper cuts, I think you said. And then the politically connected government insiders are the only ones benefiting from the industrialized theft. And so there's this monster breathing down everyone's neck, basically. And that necessarily keeps you thinking about the short term at the expense of the long term, which again is the opposite of what you want in any successful economic system, where you want to delay gratification and you want to invest for the future.
But this is such a foreign concept for people. Like when you frame it like that, people would agree. But then when you lay out the path of actually getting there, that's when people's brains start to break. when they're trapped in the Fiat Keynesian system, because they would be like, well, but we need inflation. Like, surely everyone would stop spending if we don't have inflation. It's like the mental 180 required to get to that sort of that position of thinking is just so abrupt for some people. It's like you need different levels of deprogramming before you can then rebuild it.
That's the right word too, the programming, right? That people, we used the word conditioned earlier, but people have been programmed through propaganda. Even the word inflation is euphemistic, right? It sounds good. Like, well, if you get to choose between inflation and deflation, if I don't have any other context or knowledge, I'm probably going to choose inflation. Right? It's more growth oriented. It's things are getting bigger, richer, more abundant. Deflation sounds bad. Sounds like I'm getting sad and low and, out of oxygen. But the reality is it's diluting your money or enriching your money, basically.
Great branding. And we see this across economics and across the government in general. Just the way that you term something.
Yes. It's a language game.
Is 80% of it.
Yeah.
It's like the Inflation Reduction Act.
Yes.
Like,
oh my.
As as a prime example in the US. but this is, you get this on steroids when the media starts getting captured. Because when you hear it from everywhere, okay, well, it must be true.
It's Pavlovian.
And then, but I think we've reached that point in society where the messengers also just don't even realize it.
Of course,
right? Because they've grown up and their parents have grown up in this system, and so they do think about inflation as a natural thing and a positive thing. And targeting 2% inflation is a good thing for central banks because they have our best interests at heart and they're independent of these things. It's just totally,
which makes it so
totally incorrect,
obstinate and intransigent, because people like the fiat economists, they've grown up they've been educated by fiat economists, right? Second or third generation. And then their entire livelihood and their identity is based on their identification with this false ideology.
Yeah.
They're not open to rationality. I love that quote that no man is capable of understanding the thing that his paycheck depends on him not understanding, right? Like when they are financially captured, basically, ideologically captured and through financial capture in this false ideology. And like, you can't argue your way out of that with those people. The only thing you can do, as Hayek said, is introduce by some sly roundabout way the thing that they cannot stop.
Yeah. And this is why we've got to try and reach as many people as possible and build them up to have a basic framework on which to start to hang, a basic skeletal mental framework on which to start hanging the meat on the bones.
Yes.
You know, as they gradually learn more about this or more about that, but just encouraging them to make that first step because they have a skeletal framework.
Yes.
That then gives them the reason why, right? And that's what I was trying to achieve with the video.
Yes.
So I'm not going to be able to teach you everything, but I can give you enough tools to survive, and then you can go down the rabbit hole and be like, okay, I recognize this bit. Let's pop that on there.
Right.
You know, and so, but yeah, the fiat world is just so strange.
Yeah,
Robert. Because I came from that world originally, and you know, going straight from university where I didn't do a finance degree, going into working in investment banks, it's like you're straight on the treadmill, and everyone's, you know, this is the way it works. This is the world, and there's like nothing really exists outside of that.
Yeah,
it's like the masters of the universe type thing. But then, as you say, as people spend their lives and invest their economic energy into reinforcing a system, to then knock on the door and say, by the way, you're completely wrong.
Yeah.
You're never going to get a good reaction there.
No,
ever.
Of course not. Your whole life is a lie.
Your whole life is a lie. What an opening line.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, but what a conversation starter.
And what you've spent all these years doing to put food on the table and, you know, create wealth and abundance for your family, it's a horrible thing you're stealing from people. Like, yeah, it's a bitter pill.
But also it's not obvious.
Yeah,
because you say
obvious.
it to them and they were like, well, I've been successful.
Sure.
I've made money. My firm has made money. I've progressed.
Yeah.
And it's because of what I've done, and that has been good.
Yeah.
Like I've succeeded. It's not I've entered a structure which is structurally advantaged.
Yes.
Right. And I just happen to be sitting in one of those seats taking advantage of it. But because you don't have that wider context, you don't have the framework, all you've heard growing up that this is right, this is the right thing to do, et cetera, you feel like you are wrapped in a positive moral cloak. Sure. Yeah. Rather than viewing it for what it really is sort of taking advantage of the monetary system. Yeah. It's extremely hard to see that, and you know, people often say Bitcoin is an ego test, and it is. Like that first step is, of course, because if you are not willing to even consider that the life you have led and all your decision making up to this point may have been wrong, then you've got no hope.
That's right. Yeah. In Bitcoin, we often dream about the idea of forming citadels, which are independent, self-sovereign communities that have their own energy, food, and water resources. Today, that dream is becoming a reality at the farm at Okefenokee. The farm is a 705-acre regenerative agriculture community located at the Florida-Georgia line near Folkston, Georgia. The farm is known as the healthiest place on earth, and it includes orchards, organic standing gardens, regenerative animal pastures, berry fields, and much, much more. Today, the farm features 25 custom-built cabins and has plans to construct 225 more in the years ahead. The farm has its own food, energy, and water sources and is completely off-grid. So if you're looking to join a Citadel community comprised of sovereign individuals, then go to okefarm.com today to learn more about membership. Make sure to tell them that I sent you for a $21,000 discount on custom cabin pricing. Again, that's okefarm.com OKEfarm.com to learn more about joining this revolutionary regenerative agriculture community. iCoin Technology has released a slick new hardware wallet. It looks like a mini iPhone with a high-res 3-inch touchscreen and camera on it. The device has no Wi-Fi, no cellular connection, and no GPS. It is an air-gapped hardware wallet which uses QR codes and a camera to communicate with the Bitcoin network. It has a built-in camera which is required for air-gap operation, and it has an optional Bluetooth compatibility. It's really a brand new user interface and user experience for a Bitcoin hardware wallet. iCoin makes self-custody accessible, easy to use, and non-intimidating. It even comes with an optional custom iCoin thermal printer so you can print out the private key and its associated QR code when you're setting up the wallet. This makes setup quick and simple. Also, it is easy to restore the wallet just by reading the seed phrase QR code with the wallet camera. And as we always talk about on this show, the only way you can truly own your Bitcoin is by having it in self-custody. So you need a device like the iCoin wallet to truly own your Bitcoin. So go to iCointechnology.com/breedlove today for 30% off the purchase of this sleek new hardware wallet. Again, that's iCointechnology.com/breedlove. Most Bitcoiners seem to have very high openness, trait openness, and very high, low agreeability or high disagreeability, right? They have to be willing to say what they think is right, regardless of consensus. And they have to be open and humble enough to admit when they're wrong, basically. They have to be open-minded enough to have new ideas assimilate into their mental frameworks.
Well, I think that also comes as a natural consequence of going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole because you get humbled.
Yeah, for sure.
Right. And when you've been humbled, then you're starting from zero again, and then it takes a bit of time to get that arrogance back. And this is what you notice in the Bitcoin community just by being around other Bitcoiners. And I think also it's why Bitcoiners feel at home with each other. It's like you put two of them in a room together, let's just start talking.
They're best friends,
because they already have so much in common.
Yeah.
And it's
common values.
It's not just the topics, it's the values, it's the structure, it's the way of thinking.
It's a common life philosophy, even.
Yeah.
That's where Bitcoin becomes so much more than money, as it becomes a lifestyle, becomes an outlook, a value system.
Well, I think the reason for that is that once you've seen it, you realize that you get to the realization that there's just nothing more important than it.
Yeah.
And not just, and I say that in the broadest possible sense.
Sure.
Not just, I need to have enough Bitcoin because, number go up.
Yeah.
It's because of all of the things in the video and what comes of a consequence of the things in the video and the government having this big red button is that this is the antidote.
Yes.
And what could be more important for us to be spending our time on compared to fixing the world?
Yes.
I mean, there is nothing more important than that.
Yeah, there's nothing that yields more juice for the squeeze in terms of solving more problems with fixing one thing, right? It's such an upstream problem to solve that it solves so many downstream. Solving this thing upstream will solve so many downstream consequences.
Yeah, that's right. And you'll see on social, I see it all the time now, since making the video on social media, is that you'll have somebody, if you think about that cascading effect, right, and it all stems from the big red button, you'll have somebody really angry about something, right? But that something is 2 or 3 or 4 steps down the chain. And they're adamant that this is the problem and this is the thing that needs to get fixed.
Yeah.
And even trying to get them to be open-minded about, look, I agree with you, totally. That's wrong, we need to fix it. But you're looking at
looking at a symptom.
Yeah, you're looking at the symptom, not the cause.
Yeah.
But I think over time, like the more people we can get to see the video, to establish that mental framework, that making those logical steps back up the chain of causality, like we get more and more people at the top. the more and more people we get at the top or nearing the top, the more and more people start buying Bitcoin.
Yeah.
The more people get Bitcoin in their lives, they then start on that journey to self-improvement, the actualization that
Yes.
We need to separate money and state.
Yes.
And it is a moral imperative. Then the sooner we get to ripping the big red button out of the hands of the government.
Yeah. Right. That's because that is the end game, right?
That is the end game.
The big red button is being thrown into the ocean, never to be retrieved again, right? With the monetization of Bitcoin. It's just, it's a monetary system that doesn't have a big red button. And that really makes all the difference, right? That they can't, the keyword, I mean, there's several keywords, but the keyword seems to be corruption. Obviously, you've put together a piece of content that is designed to at least be an introduction to the Bitcoin rabbit hole, maybe even a tutorial for starting your journey down the Bitcoin rabbit hole. So it's for a lay audience.
It's for a lay audience.
How do you approach this concept if you're just verbally interacting with a layperson and they're like, hey, what's up with this money thing? Like, lay it on me. How do you...
I've got a good 30 minutes for you.
What if you've got just the elevator pitch and it's just you? Like, how do you... Because this is something, I mean, in the interest of educating more Bitcoin educators, I think this is an art that we're constantly trying to dial in. And so I'm interested to hear your thoughts on it.
Yeah. So, I mean, similarly with the video, I've tried to give someone a story or an equivalent, which is not necessarily exactly how the real world works. Although, the cause and effect absolutely is, but it's more like wrapping it in a story. And you think about the story and you remember a story rather than a lecture.
Sure.
And so when people are wondering about the money or have this misconception, it's like, how do you give them a little example which is in the same ballpark and has a comparison that they can then think, okay, well, yeah, I get that. And so, one of them is, and this is a conversation I had actually with someone in a venture capital firm. Right? I was having a chat with them and he said, inflation is good. Right. Okay. And I said to him that if you forget about money, if we were going to play a board game right now, and that board game, I could change the rules whenever I want. Who's going to win the board game? He said, well, you're going to win the board game. I said, okay, so who's going to lose? I said, well, I'm going to lose, obviously. Okay, so why would you let them do that with the money? And then it's like, okay, well, yeah. Yeah, but it was like it's just like a very simple, very simple thing, and obviously not the same, but
it's pretty damn close. I mean, you could argue that money is the points we're competing for in economic games. And if there's one entity that can just award new points arbitrarily, well, that's the power to print points is the power to win in perpetuity. And so it's, the power to pick winners and losers, basically. And so that's not fair, right? Like, intuitively, that's not a fair game. You would never play that game.
You wouldn't. You would never even...
You'd never set foot in that casino.
You would never even start.
Yeah.
And if you were playing that game, you realized I could change the rules at any point in time, what would that then mean about your mentality in that game?
Right.
Would you be playing it properly? No.
It's not even a game at that point.
You wouldn't be playing. You wouldn't be engaging.
Right.
You'd be thinking about something else.
Yeah.
Which is exactly what we see. Like another one that I use sometimes is helping people understand the thought around the impact of money on a system, even if the money's not washing around explicitly in the system. And it's, imagine you're playing Monopoly and somebody has got their hand in the bank and they take a load of money out and they just pop it next to their pile. Right? And everyone can see it. No one else's money changes. What's going to happen to the cost of the houses in the game? Or just even the guy who can take the money out of the Monopoly box has got his hand resting on the box. What does that mean about the next price at which a house changes hands? Everyone's like, well, I'm not going to sell it for the price I was going to do 2 minutes ago because now he's got his hand on the box.
Yeah.
And this is like these little snippets maybe just help people think about little aspects of these things. Like,
Yeah.
Don't give them the whole picture, but at least give them that starting point. Think, okay, well, maybe there's something in that. Maybe I need to think a bit more and then read or something. But everyone's got their go-to handful of these things.
No, but these are, they come back to the big red button metaphor, right? Yeah. Which is like, it goes from being a game where for a game to be iterable and to be playable time and time again, like the rules have to be basically fixed and unchanging.
Yeah.
At least from game to game, right? Like maybe, you can play Uno a few different ways, but you don't play, the old saying, right? You can't change the rules in the middle of a card game. The rules for that game have to stay constant and immutable for fair play to work. If they're not, if the rules are immutable and changeable, then it degenerates into something else. It becomes like a political struggle, right? Where you're now going to like violently oppose one another to control those rules, because the power to control those rules is the power to win absolutely.
Yeah.
And that's a very good analogy for what we see in the world, right? Global military struggling to control the economic system, right? To basically have the most gold. Whoever has the gold makes the rules. Well, the United States, at least on paper, hasn't been audited in a long time. We have
There's
the most gold.
There's some question marks over that stuff at the moment, isn't there?
Exactly. But that is sort of it, right? Like we play this, it's not so nice to call, global geopolitical struggles and warfare a game, but we call them war games, right? Yeah. We're struggling within the confines of the laws of physics, right? There are rules that are unchangeable that we compete within. And we do put points on the board with money, basically, right? Like if your country cannot fund the war machine, well, then eventually they sign a treaty and they surrender.
Which used to be the case.
Yes.
Which used to be the case.
Right, until you introduce the big red button, which extends the war chest beyond the country's balance sheet into the pockets of all the citizens.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always tricky comparing the present with the past because, there's always the drastic technological difference.
Mm-hmm.
And so, talking about wars now versus wars 100 years ago, there wasn't the ability to wage total war.
Right.
In the way that there is today.
Yeah.
And so you have to caveat all those comparisons with that. But, 100 years ago, you had to effectively get the population's long-term agreement for maintaining these sorts of international conflicts because ultimately the bill needed to be footed.
Yeah. Right.
And, it wasn't on a scale as it is today because of the firepower involved and the cost involved. It was more, human beings need to be put on the battlefield with ammunition, as opposed to, technological cost and long range weaponry and the like. But when you give yourself the ability to endlessly finance these things without the bill ever coming due, and even more than that, without most people even knowing you're doing it, then just why the natural outcome is that just happens.
Yeah.
That just happens. So even if you had the strongest government, the fact that the big red button existed inevitably means it will get used. Yeah. And once it's used once, you can't put it back in the box.
That's right. Yeah.
Like it just has to be pressed over and over again. And you see this and this is why in the video as well, I deliberately I went out of my way to make it clear it wasn't a political thing.
Right.
Because, you look at the charts versus Democrats or Republicans.
Yeah, they're all pretty much.
You can't tell from looking at the chart which one was in power at any point in time because they all do it.
Yeah, they all serve the central bank masters.
They all do it. But I think probably some more than others.
Sure.
But ultimately,
there's nobody that's not doing it. Let's just put it that way.
Exactly. But I think it comes down to self-preservation and incentives as well, though, because no president in power wants to see an economic catastrophe.
Sure.
Yeah. And because they have, we're talking about the US here, but we could be talking about any government, because you have a legacy to protect, and you also know it's a question of short-term pain versus long-term pain,
Right.
you won't be around.
That's right. That's the other thing.
Right.
Yeah. Democracy has this built-in high time preference.
Yeah.
Where it's like, if I can just get through the next 4 to 8 years, print whatever amount of money is necessary to keep things afloat for that long, and then it's the next guy's problem.
Yeah. And we see that very clearly in the UK.
Yeah.
Very clearly in the UK. We've had, several changes to government over the last period, and we've had a fairly drastic one now, but the previous one where Labour went out and the Conservatives came in. This is probably, I'll get this wrong, like 15 years ago, 20 years ago. There was a scandal in the UK, and it wouldn't be a scandal as far as the America's concerned, but for the UK, there was uproar because I think someone in the Treasury, someone in the Labour government that was leaving had just left a sticky note on the desk for the incoming Conservative equivalent saying, "Sorry, all the money's gone," or something like that.
Wow.
It was like so flippant that, like good luck or something. And so it just shows you it's just about making sure we protect our team.
Yeah.
And it'll be the next person's fault. And when they come in, we'll shout at them for all these impacts. And you see this in the US with, the Trump administration now, people going after them from the Democrat side about the cost of living. And stuff. It's like, okay, well, these things are not an on and off switch that you did something yesterday and it impacts it today. It's a cumulative effect over time. And so, but trying to help the population unpick that and identify cause and effect, especially when it's over this accumulated time period, it's just incredibly difficult.
Again, the debasement of our understanding of the truth, right? Like it's not about, this is why I've said frequently, you can't vote in a politician that's going to make positive economic change almost by definition. Like they can do less harm. If you call that positive economic change, okay, I'll give that to you, but they're still doing harm, right?
Yeah.
Forget multivitamins and other supplements. Animal organs are the most nutrient-dense foods on the planet. You can get 100 times more nutrients from organs than you can from muscle meats. But the problem with eating organs is that they are difficult to find in stores, they are difficult to prepare, and even when they are prepared well, they often don't taste great. Thankfully, Heart and Soil Supplements has made consuming organ meats so much easier by providing powderized organs in capsule form. Organ meats include everything your body needs to thrive: vitamins, minerals, peptides, proteins, and growth factors. This is why organ meats were the most prized foods for our ancestors. Fortunately for us, Heart and Soil makes these treasured foods easily accessible. So go to heartandsoil.co today and use discount code BREEDLOVE to get started on your journey to optimal health and vitality. Again, that's heartandsoil.co, discount code BREEDLOVE. Have you ever wanted to start a business in the Bitcoin space? If so, then the Wolf Startup Accelerator could be for you. Wolf is the first startup accelerator dedicated exclusively to businesses developing in the Bitcoin Lightning Network. 4 times each year, Wolf brings teams from around the world to New York City to work with like-minded entrepreneurs, pushing the boundaries of what's possible with Bitcoin and Lightning. The program is designed to help early-stage companies achieve product-market fit, develop their brand, secure early-stage funding, and grow businesses that fuel the global adoption of Bitcoin. Go to wolfnyc.com to learn more or apply today. Again, that's Wolf, WOLFNYC.com. Encapsulated in your flowchart, actually, something that I read from Mises, who wrote Human Action like 1949. All government spending and all government action is a misallocation of capital.
Yes.
Because you have stolen from consumers via taxation and inflation to fund things that no one wanted.
Yes.
Right? You've used coercion to redirect resources that no one asked you to do that.
So in the free market, you have efficient capital allocators, and they rise to the top in the free market.
Right.
Because the more efficient you are at allocated capital, the more capital you accumulate, and it becomes a self-reinforcing reinforcing thing. It's like an evolutionary
skin in the game.
outcome of a free market. There is it's almost laughable to say that the government thinks it can drive growth by taking capital out of the hands of efficient capital allocators and allocating it inefficiently. By definition, that is just wrong.
Yeah.
It is just wrong.
Yeah.
And when you think about it like that, the amount of capital the government should be allocating should be as close to zero as possible.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
And I find it very hard to argue against that, other than on some sort of abstracted moral basis.
Yeah.
That draws an equivalence between the actions of the free market and negative impacts for the social aspects of society, which again I think is tenuous and used from typically what we see in politics is used more from like a misdirection or some previously held grievance of some nature against another set of people.
Yeah.
But the reality is, like, if you put more and more capital back in the hands of efficient capital allocators, the quality of life will go up for everybody.
Yes. Yeah.
It will. And we've seen this over the last couple of 100 years.
Right.
I mean, the US in the 1800s, just the most incredible boom.
Yeah.
There was, almost no such thing as taxes,
right.
At that point in time. But, we've corroded to such a point now where, 50% tax is viewed as like normal.
Crazy.
Or, more in some instances, certainly on a marginal rate in the UK, or again from the UK, when you reach certain arbitrary thresholds and then your tax allowance disappears instantly, and then effectively you're working for the government for an extra X amount until you can hit another bracket. It is just interference. It's just interference. And to think that this is having a positive impact on society is deluded.
Yes.
Absolutely deluded. And it is a separate issue from the big red button, because the big red button allows you to play that game indefinitely,
right?
Until you have some massive consequence.
So you hyperinflate, right?
But it doesn't remove your ability to do that temporarily. It just means that you need to do it
explicitly.
And you also need to do it in a sufficiently efficient way, is that it doesn't blow up quickly.
Right.
Because you're going to get voted out if you're taking too much tax from people, or you are overextended and then you cause economic distress to the population because of asset price depreciation, because you don't have the ability to bail yourself out. So the free market has to correct, the public feel the pain, they vote you out. You get that feedback loop much, much faster when you don't have the big red button.
Right.
But you still have the ability of the ruling government to make those changes.
Yes.
They just find out very quickly whether it works or not.
This is why that it is so important to keep a generalized field of ignorance about how money works and money printing works and how the big red button works, right? Because if you keep people ignorant about that, then you can extend all of these schemes via the money printing versus having to send people these explicit tax bills. Like one of my favorite examples of this is the US war on terror, right? We printed, I think it's in the neighborhood of $2.5 trillion over a 20-year period to fund the war on terror. We printed like 2.8 and we spent 2.5 on the war on terror, right? So it was all printed money. Had we not had the money printer or the big red button to fund that 20-year military excursion, it came out to like an $80,000 tax bill per US household. So you could imagine the resistance that people would have had they received an $80,000 bill from Uncle Sam saying, hey, we're killing people on the other side of the world and this is your fair share of the bill. Yeah. People would have been in the streets. It would have been over in the first year, right? It would have been over. But because you can money print and you can sort of externalize the consequences in this ephemeral way, and then you can blame the inflation on supply chains and greedy capitalists and all these other things, and people don't know, like people don't get it. So they're like, oh yeah, Joe Biden's on the Super Bowl commercial telling me ice cream's more expensive because of the greedy ice cream producer. Okay. Like if you don't understand how money printing works, then you're just going to believe that bullshit.
Yeah.
And so it seems, again, there's this weird pernicious problem where it's like, once you start printing the money and you start conditioning people to believe that it's all these other causes, why life's getting harder, that you need to keep doubling down on that ignorance, and you start debasing people intellectually, their character, their moral, all these things. And I don't know, it seems like one of these problems you could just like scream about till you're blue in the face, but somehow it's there, it's plain for all to see, but somehow hidden in plain sight at the same time.
Yeah, and I think you've hit on something there. You feel like you want to scream at the system, but it doesn't do any good.
Right.
It doesn't do any good. And, I think a lot of Bitcoiners go on that journey, and I certainly have as well, where you start figuring out how it works, and then you get angry about it. And then you start complaining about everything. And then, but it's a phase.
Yeah.
You come out the other side of that and say, like, most of the people don't know any better because they haven't figured it out. Right. So they're just playing the game by the rules they understand, which have naturally occurred given the corruption of the system. And your ability to influence these things is close to zero, unless you're prepared to go into politics and try and get to the top table. But
unlikely you're going to fix the root problem even in politics. But even almost certainly you're not going to be able to fix it.
Well, that's I'll come back to that in a second. But even getting to the top table without compromising yourself,
right,
is almost impossible.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's say you could do it, and then you're faced with being in the hot seat. Right? You've now got to take the big red button away. Yeah. Right. It takes a very brave person to do that.
Yes.
Very brave, because there's going to be short-term pain.
Yeah. Extreme.
And to come back to your point earlier, you said it made me think about Argentina, in that people don't vote for the pain, but they do when it's already so painful.
Right. Yeah.
And we have this slow decline, but it's so gradual in every aspect of our lives that nobody's up in arms about it to such an extent that you would vote for the pain.
Sure.
We're still at the stage of this team can fix it or that team can fix it.
Yeah. Which is
the gap between that and Argentina. I mean, how long was Argentina in socialism for? 60 years, 70 years, something like that.
Yeah.
Right. It takes a long time to reach boiling point.
Right.
And so when you then think about the impact that you can have, well, you can either fight against this, or you can just try and do it another way. You try and help people make the same leap that you've made, because we can either fight the system or we can defund the system.
Right. Yes.
And if you defund the system's going to collapse sooner. And it's a unilateral set of actions. Every individual can make that choice.
Yeah.
And just to be clear, I don't mean defund the system as in don't pay a tax or something like that. I mean
just move purchasing power into Bitcoin and out of fiat.
Yeah. And it's in your small actions every day. One of the things that's become very clear after launching this video, Robert, is we have so many people around the world, like sleeper cells everywhere. I've got hundreds and hundreds of emails from people in lots of different countries, and often they are by themselves, or trying to convince friends and family, or trying to educate friends and family about what they understand, and then are really struggling with it. But they're isolated. But they're everywhere, and like the number of requests that people have sent me on LinkedIn, which I know LinkedIn isn't particularly well thought of, but if you're trying to bring business people along on this journey, it's very hard to do that if you're not on LinkedIn. But the number of people who connected with LinkedIn and sent me a message saying, loved your video, been a Bitcoiner for X number of years. You'd look at the profile, you would have no idea.
Yeah.
No idea.
I get similar messages.
Yeah. You must get much more than I do on this front,
Well,
and have more transparency. But
Yeah.
but it just shows you, like, we have these people dotted everywhere, and at some point in time, it is going to become socially acceptable.
Yes.
And it will go. Like, I feel like
It's
we're
like
on
a tipping point, right?
I feel like we're on the edge of Bitcoiners feeling like they need to keep their understanding and their views in check and not share them with people in a corporate environment, these sorts of things, because it's still considered, because it has been considered out there.
Yes.
And you are not a serious person if you're thinking about this, digital funny money, to, oh my God, I'm glad you're here, right? You need to help us understand what this thing is and help us prepare for the future. Like, we're not quite there.
Right.
But you could see, given the shift, the drastic shift that's now occurring in the US, and the adoption of, the launch of the ETFs and the validation of Bitcoin as a credible asset coming from various senior positions, in a variety of ways. It sort of trickles down to the NPCs.
Yes.
Who are like, okay, well, this is no longer for criminals. This is, validated by the government.
Yes.
Oh, and now you start to see the writing on the wall. And so all these people dotted around, they're this untapped resource that we have within the Bitcoin community. Like, so many people are listening to podcasts, and some get to go to conferences, and some, but the vast majority don't get to go to conferences. Not everyone listens to podcasts. But we've got all this latent potential. Yeah. And it's at some point soon, it's going to come bursting through.
Yes. Yeah, the metaphor of like a volcano was coming to mind, right? Where the pressure is building beneath the surface. There's not really any visible sign of it.
Yeah.
And then at some point, there's an inflection point, right? And the thing just, because the messages, I get similar messages where it's like, thank you for your work. I'm really glad you're speaking out about this. I'm a Bitcoiner too, but I'm not public about it because usually their job, right? It's like my job or whatever, career risk, public perception risk for whatever it is they do. And they're in all walks of life, all different industries. And it's like, it's a great question. Like, how many of those are out there? Yeah. Right. At some point, they're going to realize, like, oh shit, we're the majority now. Like,
so many. I mean, so many on an absolute number, very small as a percentage of the population.
Of course.
But they're in all sorts of places. And what I feel I've gone through, and you're ahead of me on this, is that when you get to that point, and there's always the backdrop of financial security and family security and these sorts of things. So not everyone is necessarily always in the position to make that step, even if mentally you are ready because of obligations and things. Yeah. But like, once you reach that point, and it just becomes crystal clear that you shouldn't be working on anything else.
Yeah.
Like, anything else is just a waste of your time.
Yeah.
A waste of your time and energy. And I say anything else sort of loosely, because up until this point, like, the development of Bitcoin has been, started very, very technical, right? And it's gone out into like, economics and philosophy, and and so for you've been able to jump into that expanding funnel earlier than many people who have different skills, because your skills, like, okay, now there's enough overlap between my skills and this that I can dedicate all my time to this and make it an economically viable decision, which aligns. Like, you found your Ikigai, right?
Very much so, yeah.
And but that is like an expanding cone for the Bitcoiners watching this or listen to any Bitcoiner around the world. They've got a specific set of skills that's unique, reasonably unique to them.
Yeah.
Right. But there's probably a lot of people in the world who have a similar set of skills, but still a very small percentage of the population. And so if you're a, digital marketing or something like that, or a carpenter, there's lots of people who have those skills. It's still very small in the population as a percentage. But if you think about the intersection of carpenters or digital marketers who get Bitcoin.
Right. Very small.
Very small.
Right.
Very small. And so you have a massive, massive competitive advantage. Right. This latent competitive advantage.
Yeah.
Because the world is going to Bitcoin.
Yes.
And 99.9% of the people, or 99.0%
don't realize
of the people, however, that you're competing against in fiat world are going to fall away.
Yeah.
Right. You have the head start on everybody here. And think about what that means for you as an individual. Like if you start thinking about that in that way, I think it helps unlock purpose. Be like, okay, I've got the head start on everybody here.
Yeah.
I know where this is going.
Yes.
So if I can find a way to leverage my skill set in a way which aligns with Bitcoin, then I've got the best opportunity out of all my peers to drive the best outcome for myself. And as we've already talked about, if you're driving the best outcome for yourself and it's aligned with Bitcoin, you're driving the best outcome for everybody.
Right.
And so what's not to like about that, the thinking about the future in that way?
Yes.
And so if we've developed this series of sleeper agents all over the world in every little nook and cranny with every little, set of particular skills, and we find a way to sort of help these people bubble to the surface, right? Imagine the drastic and sudden impact we can have on like so many disparate sectors and disparate countries. But because this is hidden, people just don't know it's coming, but it's 100% coming.
Yeah, no, it's a fascinating perspective, and it's one of the beautiful aspects of the internet. Something that it makes possible is this like micro niche you're describing, right? Where you're a digital marketer, but you're also a carpenter, but you're also a Bitcoiner. It's like, maybe there's more elements to that stack, but as you add more elements to the stack, it becomes more and more niche and more specific, and you become more and more likely to be like one of the handful of people in the world that has that set of skills.
Yeah.
And the fact that the cost of distribution for your ideas or your content is like near zero, right? You can reach basically everyone. It's a beautiful thing, right? You get hyper specialized individuals. And if you're going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole too, you're kind of front running everyone else.
Yeah.
Like whatever stack of skill sets you have, if you have Bitcoin on that, well, then you are by definition front running the world. And that's fascinating, right? That Bitcoin becomes something like a nation with the most highly skilled workforce.
Yeah. That's exactly how I think about it. But think about what that means. So you are somebody somewhere with a particular set of skills that is engaged with Bitcoin and thinking about driving it forward, incorporating Bitcoin into your life in whichever way makes sense. And the way it makes the most sense. Right? It could be, I'm going to talk about Bitcoin at work. I'm going to try and put on a educational session. I'm going to try and get, 10 people in a room to watch What's the Problem at lunchtime. Right, and then we'll have a conversation about it. It could be, I've thought about the payments infrastructure that we use in our company, right? Bitcoin strips away half the cost, so I'm going to go and have a conversation with somebody, not because we're ready for that now, but if I speak to him and I'm thinking like a business owner, right? And I can think we can shave 5% off our costs. That's probably 30% P&L bump. In the business. That director then looks around at you and thinks, okay, you're thinking about the future of this business. That's positive for you. You're thinking about pushing Bitcoin forward at the same time. Like there's 100 different things that you could do. And even in your daily life, go into every shop. Every time you pay for anything, just say, can I pay in Bitcoin? Right? They're going to say no.
Yeah.
Right. 99%. But just say it anyway.
Yeah.
Right. Because the more we say it, eventually they'll be like, a lot of people asking for this. We should maybe look into this thing. Yeah. It doesn't cost you anything.
Right.
And it's just, every individual thinking about the small actions you can do every day to drive this forward. It's just incredibly powerful in a cumulative basis.
Yeah.
But it sort of misses, that's like half of it. The other half is what you get back from the community. Because that's all about individual action. But the community, and you know this, is just so incredibly supportive. That, we champion each other because we know we're all chasing the same goal. Right?
Yeah, the incentive alignment is just titanic.
Exactly, and it extends to the free market as well. So, I would go out of my way to spend money with a company that has adopted Bitcoin. I'd spend money with a company that accepted Bitcoin over one that didn't. But I would spend more with that company if they've adopted Bitcoin.
Right.
As in, they understand it for what it is, or they're on the journey to understanding it for what it is.
Yeah.
They're accepting Bitcoin.
They're holding reserves in Bitcoin.
And they're taking that acceptance and leaving it on the balance sheet to effectively grow a treasury.
Yeah.
You don't have to go full sailor straight away.
Right.
That's where you end up.
Yeah.
But just accepting Bitcoin, getting a small amount on the balance sheet and letting it accrue, because it'll be so small to start with. Over time, it will naturally grow. The business owners will see, this thing's naturally growing, and we're gradually taking more of it. This is pretty good. Like we should be engaging here. But the Bitcoin community would over-index on engaging with those people.
Yeah.
So Bitcoin is a competitive advantage for everybody, for the individual.
Yeah.
Right. But also for the company and also for the country. And so, there are examples of, Bitcoin accountancy firms that have then just dedicated themselves to, I'm going to be a Bitcoin accountant, or I'm going to be a Bitcoin dentist. And their business grows 30%, 50% year over year, because they don't have Bitcoin dentist over the door necessarily, or Bitcoin accountant over the door, but they let it be known in the community that they're a Bitcoiner.
Yeah.
Right. And then it just attracts the capital from everybody else, because we don't want to fund the existing system. We want to have free movement of capital, and we'll back and engage with the people we know we're aligned with.
Yeah.
And when you play that forward, we are starting from such a low base. It's like orange pilling adoption. But it's the same with orange pilling adoption. It's the same with merchant adoption. It's the same with competitive advantage. It is inevitable. It just consumes everything because it's unstoppable. You have the best solution. You have the best money. You have the best payments technology once it's fully built out, right? And these are iterative things, right? It's going to win. It is incomparable compared to the existing solutions for money or for payments, these sorts of things.
Yeah.
We know this, right? And if every day that passes, more and more people walk through the one-way door to Bitcoin and they never come out, then eventually everybody walks through. And if everyone walks through, it means eventually everyone will just want to spend money with Bitcoin merchants in whatever sense. So just being a fiat merchant is a death sentence.
Yeah.
Right? You just don't know it yet. It's a death sentence in the long run. And then you take that forward to, a country level. If you engage with Bitcoin and you provide the foundations for people to engage in Bitcoin, businesses to engage in Bitcoin and to succeed, right? You set yourself up for long-term success. If you fight that, you die. Like it's very clear. It's just the compound thinking, which I think like we get, but most people don't. And it's I think two things. One is it's a very hard concept anyway, and you have to have gone down the Bitcoin rabbit hole to really see that coming.
Yeah.
But also the personality and the mental personality types that we have in the community are very skewed, generally speaking. Like we over-index on, people with a maths or engineering or physics background.
Yeah.
Where it's like systems, and then you think about cause and effect and cause and effect and cause and effect. 3 or 4 things down the road. Because most people just don't think about
adversarial thinkers.
Yeah. And it's probabilistic thinkers as well. Which is the minority of the population.
Right.
Which means that we also have a massive advantage because it's going to probably extend further than we think, because it's going to take a long time for those people where that way of thinking is not natural.
Take them a long time to catch
on.
Yeah.
But what is going to happen is that, the Parker Lewis, gradually, then suddenly, and we are going to find a time in the not too distant future where people don't have to understand Bitcoin to have sats in their pocket and to be using Bitcoin. In the same way that people don't have to understand how the US and clearly don't understand how the fiat monetary system works to be able to use fiat money.
Right.
That's such an obvious statement, but from where we're sat right now, it almost seems like an impossibility, because for us to have used Bitcoin, like we've been through that process.
Right.
You've had to do the hard yards because the surface area of reach for our Bitcoin bubble, social reach bubble, is so small that the tools and things that we've built are mainly for ourselves. And so it assumes that pre-existing knowledge. It assumes, a certain personality type who's going to persevere with something because they're motivated to do so.
Yeah.
Right? Which is like to the exclusion of pretty much everybody else.
100%. Would you rather have 1 Bitcoin today or 2 Bitcoin a few years from now? Bitcoin mining is a tried and true strategy for accumulating Bitcoin. Over a 2 to 4 year time frame, successful miners have consistently accumulated more Bitcoin than they otherwise would with a traditional dollar cost average strategy. Blockware's mining as a service enables you to start mining Bitcoin from your laptop. Blockware handles everything from securing the miners to sourcing low-cost power to configuring the mining pool. They do it all. Plus, with Blockware's one-of-a-kind mining marketplace, you can buy and sell live Bitcoin miners with just a few strokes of the keyboard. In this marketplace, buyers get to purchase live machines at vetted facilities, enabling them to mine with 0 lead time. And sellers get the opportunity to liquidate their machines and hosting contracts at will. This means you can mine Bitcoin with 0 long-term commitment and high liquidity on your mining rigs. Blockware will even cover your miner's energy bill for the first week of each of your mining rigs when you sign up at mining.blockwaresolutions.com/breedlove. Again, that's 1 free week of Bitcoin mining at mining.blockwaresolutions.com/breedlove. Bitcoin custody is evolving. Both self-custody and single third-party custody come with significant risk and trade-offs. OnRamp is pioneering a new standard, multi-institution custody, which eliminates single points of failure, adding fault tolerance and redundancy to your setup. OnRamp secures your Bitcoin in a segregated cold storage multi-key vault guarded by 3 independent institutional-grade custodians, none of which have unilateral control over your keys. Your funds are fully auditable on-chain, cannot be rehypothecated, and can only move or be withdrawn at your explicit direction. Multi-institution custody removes the technical, mental, and physical burdens of private key management, providing unparalleled peace of mind for you and your loved ones. Bitcoin is money, and as the price continues to appreciate, OnRamp helps you seamlessly tap into financial services like trading, inheritance, insurance, loans, IRAs, and more, all without compromising on security or accessibility. Schedule a consultation with the OnRamp team to learn more at onrampbitcoin.com/breedlove. Again, that's onrampbitcoin.com/breedlove. We looked at, I don't know if you've seen this floating around on Twitter, but they've analyzed like the Myers-Briggs personality types.
That's exactly what I had in mind.
Yeah. So we're like, Bitcoiners are very overrepresented in the INTJ and ENTJ categories.
Yeah.
I'm an INTJ.
Same.
So surprise, surprise.
Yeah.
And then there's certain Myers-Briggs combinations where there's 0% representation basically. And yeah, that's a really big deal. So we're talking about, I mean, there's an echo chamber component to this, right? Like the people that get it sort of speak in the language that the other people that get it also speak. And then it helps, it does grow, but it could be more, and I hate that language has been so co-opted now. Like there could be ways to make it more inclusive. I don't mean this in a DEI sense. I just mean like speaking the language of people that don't get Bitcoin to help them get Bitcoin, which is sort of like what you've done with the video here.
It's exactly what I was trying to do.
So like in addition to this, which are like custom artistic educational pieces, I would assume we could also build businesses that would bring people, it could orange pill people sort of implicitly or indirectly.
Yeah.
Like how do you think about the orange pilling of the human race? Like what we need to keep doing the education piece, but what can we do like in the business building domain?
I think you have to do all these things in parallel rather than necessarily sequentially. But I would frame it, before answering that specifically on the businesses, I'd frame up thinking about the adoption of Bitcoin for the general population as sort of having 3 stages. And I'm not necessarily focused on whether it's store value or medium of exchange, because that's a different dimension. It's more just sort of the engagement with the population. And one is awareness. And I think Bitcoin's done pretty well on the awareness for something that doesn't have a marketing department.
Yeah, it's amazing.
No CEO, nothing. I think you'd struggle to find someone who hadn't heard of Bitcoin.
Yeah.
I mean, certainly in the West. Yeah. And that's like near 100% penetration. And
you could possibly call it the most successful meme of all time.
Yeah.
I mean, you could go into the distant past and obviously find some more effective examples, right? Like I don't know, just modern memes. I'd say it's probably the most successful of all time. Now, I guess that's subject to debate, but it's done extremely well for not having any
zero paid marketing,
centralized backing whatsoever. Yeah.
And so if you've got near 100% awareness, more or less, then the next stage is to get someone to use it is understanding.
Yeah.
You can be aware of something, but have no clue what it is or any way to have any mental framework for understanding why it's relevant. Right? That is the piece that we're struggling with. If you can solve that piece, it then just becomes a product positioning. Is it cool? Is it what my friends are doing? Is it whatever? But that's severely inhibited by the second piece. So we've got to help people get a even superficial understanding of Bitcoin to start with as quickly as possible in the broadest possible way. Now, it doesn't have to be explaining how the Fed works or any of these things. It can just be, there's a big red button, they press it and it affects me negatively.
Yeah.
Bitcoin is the answer.
Yeah.
And I know all these problems are because of the big red button. Like that is a tick in that middle box. So you're aware of it. You now have an understanding broadly of how it's helpful to you. And then now you've got the motivation, maybe not the access, or you're not sufficiently motivated to engage, but you're open to it. Right. And then that's the execution piece. Right. But we can't do that until we really built this out a bit more. And so hopefully the video helps with this middle piece. But as far as taking that and then thinking about businesses, and this comes back also to the personality distribution type and wanting to put gradually, suddenly into the real world. The people who arrive during the suddenly period, they will use what everybody is using. They won't necessarily understand why. They won't understand what it is, what's so special about Bitcoin. Right. They won't understand the 99% of Bitcoin. Yeah. They'll just use it because that's just what you do.
Yeah.
And the way that we unlock that is to integrate Bitcoin into everyday life in a way that people don't have to know how it works. Right? You cannot do that right now. You cannot do that, even with the sort of the consumer applications that we have, and they're very few within Bitcoin outside of wallets. They still require a certain amount of knowledge or skill or context or motivation being a Bitcoiner to use. You wouldn't use those applications unless you were a Bitcoiner to start with, or or a fan of privacy or something. Like there's some small niche versus the whole population motivation as to why you use these things, but which is great for early adoption, early support from the community. So everyone will want to use the app, want to help you succeed, but it immediately caps the success of it. Right. Because you can't break out into something else.
It's a microculture.
Yeah. And so what we really need those breakout applications where people use them not because it's Bitcoin. Right. But it has Bitcoin in them. And if we can find those applications where people would use them anyway, they are winning business models. And it's rational for people to use them. And as a consequence of using them, they get sats in their pocket. It's almost game over. Because we know what happens when you get sats in your pocket. You start to look at the price. Your ears start to prick up when you hear Bitcoin. You then read you don't watch a podcast. You read a book, and then
I always say, where your money goes, your mind follows.
Yeah, exactly. And it doesn't take a lot. No. But it needs to be there, and it needs to be reliably there and accessible without any pre-existing knowledge, right? And that's the missing gap on the business side. So if we can find ways to do the education, bring people up, get that in front of as many people as possible, get them to the starting line, right? That's one thing. We can also build businesses that put sats in the pocket of everybody, and they don't have to know what they are, but just know that they're valuable and therefore be interested in Bitcoin. That's a winning combination if we can do those two things. And so
so when they're in people's pockets, you're saying people just start to see the price moving, and then their curiosity starts to follow the rabbit hole. Yeah. Naturally. You're just...
Yeah. But you would use the applications. Yeah. You would use those businesses not because it's got Bitcoin in.
Of course.
It's incidental.
Right. This is so interesting because it's Hayek's sly roundabout way to take the state's hands out of money, right? Or to take money away from the state. You're proposing something similar by some sly roundabout way. We introduce people to Bitcoin without being explicit about it. Like, here's some other value proposition that you find useful. Oh, by the way, on the back end, this thing is using Bitcoin somehow, or paying you in Bitcoin, or whatever it may be.
Absolutely. And you might think, well, why aren't businesses doing that today? The reality is they could do that today. Most of them, it just hasn't dawned on them.
It hasn't dawned on them.
And we had Elon Musk announced the partnership, I think, with Visa for X.
Completely missed the ball on that one, didn't he?
But it's a prime example. Yeah. If Elon Musk was a Bitcoiner,
smart.
No, I have nothing but the utmost respect for what he's doing and what he's doing for humanity.
I'll give him. I mean, he's Elon Musk. Like, who am I to say anything? But the fact that he's been so duplicitous around Bitcoin puts up a big red flag for me. I just think he's full of shit in that department for whatever reason. I don't know why.
Yeah, I'll sort of dodge that conversation because I don't. Yeah.
And who am I to judge, by the way? But that's just my opinion. So.
But as an individual who is trying to push forward, you would think him and Bitcoin are made to be together.
Exactly.
And so there's a question mark as to why that hasn't happened yet. And I severely hope it does, or sincerely hope it does, and severely. But you could have had X with the Lightning Network embedded in it, and everybody on X having sats in their pocket. Yeah. Now, if he was a Bitcoiner, you think about the step change that we would then see in terms of adoption, education, motivation, all of these different things. But this is going to happen. It just hasn't happened yet.
That's right.
Right. But we're going to start seeing those breakouts.
Yes.
There's going to be a business which is not the size of X.
Right.
Which incorporates it in some way. Right. But the technology has to be pushed far enough. You have to have somebody in those businesses who is in a position of decision-making authority,
Mm-hmm.
right? So typically either, founder-owned and founder-led,
Mm-hmm.
or SMEs,
Mm-hmm.
small, medium enterprises. But then your reach for each of those is still quite small, right? They're not X,
Mm-hmm.
with the hundreds of millions of people. But, you can see just like picking off as more and more people get orange pilled,
Mm-hmm.
that you'll have this burst of, second order, third order orange pilling, which will happen in all the people connected to that through these applications, which then have Bitcoin integrated in them naturally.
Right.
And it's just inevitable.
Yeah.
It's just totally inevitable.
And
but-
so when you say that, sorry, continue if you like, but
Yeah.
the word inevitable, we use it a lot in Bitcoin circles. Like, oh, Bitcoin is inevitable, it's unstoppable.
Yeah.
I think with more nuance, we're saying something like this tool serves the self-interest of every individual to such an extreme that people will naturally adopt it because for that very reason. Right? It's like a Darwinian type of effect.
You can't outcompete it.
Yeah, so I like the analogy to gunpowder, right? It's like if you don't adopt gunpowder, well then you're just going to get wiped out. Like there's no like, do I want to adopt it or not? It's like you either adopt it or you die.
Yeah.
It's similar to that. It's not obviously lethal, but your purchasing power will get vaporized in anything else. So if you don't adopt Bitcoin at some point, well then you're going to be naturally selected out of economic existence, at least. Something like that, right? Like we're not saying it's a foregone conclusion, it's flirting with a dangerous line actually. Because if you really think it's inevitable, then it's like, well, we all just kick back and relax and we don't do anything. Obviously we're not doing that. We're educating, we're building businesses.
Well, there are people who inevitably in the community who would do that. I've got my Bitcoin on lockdown. I'm at the beach. Call me when it happens, guys.
Right.
Like,
but that doesn't characterize the Bitcoiners that I know.
No, there are always going to be individuals who are more motivated, less motivated, etc.
Of course.
Stages in life. When I say inevitable, it is a logical logical inevitability, but I'm using it to define the word. But
progression. Maybe.
It is. Just probabilistically, it's going to happen.
Yeah,
because of the lived experience that you and I have both, and everybody at home has been through.
Yeah.
Because are you ever not going to be a Bitcoiner?
No. And I don't know anyone, by the way, and I can say this unequivocally without exception. I don't know anyone that's become a Bitcoiner and then not become a Bitcoiner. I mean, I guess you could say there's like the Roger Veres or whatever that became a Bitcoin Cash shitcoiner, but I don't know. Did they get bought? Like, was that a social attack? Who knows? I don't know. The people that I've personally interacted with that I know have engaged in this course of study, no one comes back.
Yeah. So if that's the case,
it's so like not only is it a financial singularity, but it's like an intellectual, philosophical singularity. Like you go one direction, and it's all roads lead to Bitcoin.
Yeah. So what then happens over the passage of time? Everybody
it's
gets
mathematical, there. Right? Yeah.
So everybody gets there, even from an intellectual perspective.
Yeah.
Let alone thinking about the competitive advantage that then
it
puts rocket fuel under that for people who are intellectually curious, motivated, and then maniacal about driving that forward for everybody else and bringing everyone along with them. That's an unstoppable trio.
Yeah.
And so that's what I mean by inevitable. It is a foregone conclusion.
And those people are the smartest, the most disagreeable, typically very well heeled. And if they're not well heeled now, they're going to be well heeled in 4 years because that's what Bitcoin does. And it is a very asymmetric and increasingly asymmetric tilt, right? That the Bitcoin team just keeps getting bigger and badder.
And wealthier.
And stronger and wealthier. And it's like, how are you going to compete with that? What could possibly compete with that?
Nothing
can. Even like absolute violence, like the coordination of all the nations in the world, like would have a really hard time competing with that.
You would, because the rational thing to do is join it.
Just to cooperate. Yeah. Exactly.
And
all the purchasing power gets its tentacles into all the political structures, so it like starts to tilt those
and
things in its favor. Yeah, it's already happening.
Yeah. So it's inevitable. But you raise a really good point, which we didn't touch on before, which was, as Bitcoin monetizes the world. Everybody who holds Bitcoin is not only all the things we've already talked about, they're also increasingly wealthy, right? Which allows us to invest in more businesses aligned.
Yeah, right. Yes.
Aligned to the outcome.
Yes, right.
Right. And there's two roads here, and I'll come back to the investing in a second. If that's all right. I've started on the wrong one because let's go to the other one first. The other one is the spending.
Yeah.
Right. You've got more money in your pocket. You're likely to be spending more over time as things, you upgrade your life, and especially if you are supporting Bitcoin businesses. Right. So if you think about, you're becoming wealthier, helping support businesses that have adopted Bitcoin in the broadest sense, not just accept it, but adopt Bitcoin. That's going to drive competitive advantage and long-term growth for those businesses, which is going to breed more Bitcoiners in those businesses, which are then going to leave and create more businesses. And that alone is on the unstoppable side. But then if you think about the investing, what you have Michael Saylor doing for MicroStrategy, effectively unlocking the financing glitch here. This is just the beginning. Yeah, this is just the beginning because what he's done is take a close to zero growth, cash flowing company, and attached it to a rocket ship by putting Bitcoin on the balance sheet and financial structuring. There are thousands of these companies, and what is clear. And what remains to me like the big obvious hole to fill here is doing this on the industrial scale. Because you've got MicroStrategy, you have MetaPlanet, you have companies who realize the value they can create for shareholders by adopting this thing. But it's unilateral adoption, right? Individual companies, typically founder-led or founder-owned, right? Or with a dominant shareholder.
Yeah.
And also typically not category leaders.
Yeah, right? with agile decision making, so they can move quickly.
Yeah,
and they're positive free cash flow. You can make it's like just switching your savings account, and you unlock this massive accretion of shareholder value. It's like very low energy transition for high output gain.
Total no brainer.
Yeah,
unless you are a category leader,
right?
Or you have something to protect, right? And so it's going to be not going to be the incumbents who drive this thing,
right?
Unless the incumbents have so much cash on the balance sheet, Apple, to you have to start doing something, and there's no downside for doing it, right? But these small companies, they're taking a competitive advantage, and over time, as more and more companies do it, the rewarding by the market for each company that does it will gradually decline because it will become obvious that all companies will ultimately do this, and share prices will reflect it, even if the company hasn't made a decision to move already. But the big missing gap here for me is the industrialization of that. So, for example, you have private equity who raise big funds, and then they go out and acquire private companies. But you also have investment companies that raise funds and then take invest in public companies as well. Now, you've got a playbook here from Michael Saylor.
Yeah.
If I was a private equity,
and he's open sourced the playbook.
Yeah. If I was a private equity business, and I want to drive long-term capital returns for both my investors and for us as managers on a 2 and 20 or not 2 and 20, probably the private equity, but not too dissimilar.
Yeah.
You would want to industrialize the most value accretive playbook that's ever been, right? But you do it on an industrial scale. So there's so many zombie companies out there, so many zombie companies, right? And there's no growth. They're just ticking along, especially with the demographic change that is happening at the moment. Right. They're already prime targets for private equity.
Yeah.
If you go in there with and inject Bitcoin onto the balance sheet of all of these companies,
chop down the cost structure.
The things you would do anyway, right? And then
Put them on the Bitcoin standard.
And then append it with the strategy.
Yeah.
Strategy.
Yeah. strategy.
Then you are unlocking massive amounts of shareholder value, but you're doing it across dozens of companies at the same time. And then the ability of those companies to then go public.
Mm-hmm.
It accelerates the liquidity phase
for
you as the investor.
Yeah.
Right? Which is not going to last forever. So it is such a no-brainer strategy for the private equity world that I fully expect the next 12, 18 months, we start seeing pop-ups of these Sailor-esque private equity funds. It's basically just free money is what's going to happen to these businesses anyway.
So the mass production of these Sailor-esque strategy businesses, it makes a lot of sense too.
It's entirely logical.
It's a tried and true playbook, and it's open source, and the conversion costs are very small. Right? You're just, especially now that all the regulatory clarity is there. You know that we've had all the changes in the wake of strategy.
Yeah, and what's also nice about these sorts of investment vehicles is typically there's a lot of debt that goes into private equity owned businesses. Right? They make them shareholder. They acquire them, put a load of debt in, grow the business through senior securities or preferred shares and these sorts of things. So they already have the firepower and willingness to put debt in the capital structure. But instead of taking it out as dividends, you just put it in Bitcoin instead.
Yeah.
Right. And over the time frame that you care about as an investor, which is going to be 5 to 10 years for these private equity businesses, nothing's going to outperform Bitcoin.
Right.
So why would you take the dividends?
Right.
And so it's like private equity 2.0, which we haven't seen yet, which is anybody who wants to do this, give me a call. Because if I wasn't focused on the things I intend to be focusing on, this is what I would probably be doing because it's such a no-brainer.
Right. That makes a lot of sense. One of my highest health priorities is keeping my brain in top shape. To take care of my brain power, I do many things, such as striving to read, write, exercise, and meditate daily. One of the latest tools in my brain power toolkit is MindLab Pro. MindLab Pro is a nootropic supplement that is scientifically proven to enhance your brain power. When I take MindLab Pro, my mind feels like it has a better grip on the world, my thinking is more lucid, and the articulation of my speech is radically improved. MindLab Pro has been tested in rigorous, double-blind, placebo-controlled human trials and has been proven to enhance brain power for users in every age group. MindLab Pro is an advanced formulation of 11 nootropic ingredients and is backed by research from over 1,400 human trials conducted over the past 32 years. So if you're looking to enhance your brain power, MindLab Pro is an excellent solution. Go to mindlabpro.com/breedlove to start enhancing your brain power today. Again, that's mindlabpro.com/breedlove. If you're listening to this podcast, you probably get it. You get that Bitcoin upends everything that state-sponsored schools teach us about money. For those who get the importance of Bitcoin, it is important that we have a smart way to buy and hold Bitcoin. My friends at Coinbits, the oldest Bitcoin-only exchange in the United States, have pioneered the concept of roundups, which converts your spare change into Bitcoin. Simply connect your credit or debit cards, and your usual purchases are rounded up to the nearest dollar, letting you stack sats on every purchase without even thinking about it. Coinbits also provides a terrific self-custody experience. Connect a hardware wallet for automatic withdrawals into cold storage to minimize your risk and stay sovereign over your Bitcoin. My favorite Coinbits feature is Coinbits Plus, which gives you the best exchange rate on Bitcoin. It even gives you real-time feedback on how well you are doing on your savings plan. With Coinbits Plus, power users can save more money to buy even more Bitcoin. All that, plus peer-to-peer cash and Bitcoin payments, target orders, price alerts, and more means Coinbits can help you do almost anything you need to do with Bitcoin. So go to coinbits.app/breedlove to sign up today. Again, that is Coinbits, BITS.app /Breedlove. You studied physics at Oxford.
Yeah.
Just walk me through, I guess. I've always found physics to be extremely fascinating. I actually think it's very useful in understanding Bitcoin. We talked a little bit about Gabriel's horn earlier. That's in Lowry's book, Software. But like, how did physics set you up to grok Bitcoin, if at all? And how has physics influenced the way you form mental models about business, about finance, about Bitcoin?
It's such a natural fit. For me, the big thing is inference.
Inference, okay.
Yeah, that is. I was when I was asked to go to the weekend away, in which I decided to prepare this presentation. Great, what's the problem? My first thought was, maybe I'll go and talk to them about inference. And I thought, no, it's too small, it's too niche. I'll go and talk about Bitcoin instead.
It's extremely essential, though. Inference to meaning making through analogy and metaphor and things like this.
Yeah, and to then extend that to.
Now, I don't commonly associate that with physics, though. That's interesting. You brought up inference.
Well, because I think about it in terms of trying to establish what you think is true or what may be true from partial information.
Right.
So you're inferring something as opposed to being able to directly observe it, which is a critical part of physics because
can't really directly observe anything, actually. Like even our perceptions aren't.
The more you try and look, the less you can see.
Yes.
And so there's inference in everything, but a lot of it is just rooted in maths. And if I look back over my career, I've spent a lot of time leveraging the power of things that were not obvious to other people who didn't have that physics foundation, and thinking about inference, thinking about, well, if these things are true, then what does that mean? What can I infer from that about the next thing? Or these bits of partial information, what can I infer about what the conclusion therefore must be or is likely to be, which you can apply to anything, right? And it's like in our daily lives, we have these. You have little observations of different things, and it helps you build a map of the world. Yeah. You don't need to observe everything to draw conclusions, but the sooner you can draw conclusions from limited information, the better position you're in.
Yeah, and again, it's probabilistic, right?
You're
never going to draw the perfect conclusion. It's always operating on imperfect data.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
So it's getting that right, and it sort of manifests itself in risk and reward.
Yeah.
Because if you wait until if something's 100% observable,
right, there's no upside.
Then there's no upside.
Yeah.
And so, but it's identifying that tipping point and making sure that you are prioritizing the right thing at the right moment in time. And for me, that framework, and this is only something I've sort of thought about by reflecting on it rather than thinking I'm using this framework and this is what I'm going to do. It's sort of something that evolved, but it's allowed me to navigate to the best bet at any point in time. And for me, the best bet when I was in the city, that sort of manifested itself in me trading a derivatives book where you're constantly having to think about probabilistic outcomes, because by definition these things are non-linear and you have to care about all the paths, and then constantly thinking about, well, what if this and this and this.
Right.
And then from there into modeling sports from a mathematical perspective, and taking the way that we did that was to do it sort of the opposite way that most people would do it. Most people would say, if you're trying to calculate the probability of something happening in a game, in a sport, you'd be, all right, give me some data about what's happened in the past.
Right.
And then I'll understand the teams, I'll understand the players, and then I'll make some sort of
extrapolation
decision about what I think may happen in the future. Whereas the way where we found success in the business that we created was by totally ignoring that first bit. It's like, we don't need to know any of the statistics. We don't need to know any of the information. We'll just look at prices we'll look at the existing prices in the market for various things because they all contain hidden information.
In sports?
In sports. So,
what
betting.
Prices we? Oh,
so like
okay.
betting.
Got it.
Example.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's interesting. You're just looking at the odds.
Okay,
interesting.
Every price is inaccurate.
Right.
But if you have enough inaccurate prices, then you can extract some.
You can
infer something more accurate.
Yeah.
Right. It's like the wisdom of the crowds.
Yeah.
But on an automated basis with engineering, real-time engineering attached. And so we were able to leverage that inference to then monetize it by creating things that other people weren't able to because they couldn't make that leap. And it's a combination of the approach of inference with the mathematical knowledge and the engineering to then unlock it. And then you go and create products which no one else can create, and then you unlock value. And we then joined another business. But that's to say that at that point in time, focusing on that was the best bet to make. Right? It was the best risk reward at that point in time. And then when we were acquired, that was the best thing to do. The decision to say yes was absolutely the best thing to do on a risk reward basis. So my entire career has been assessing risk and reward. It's like you don't get wealthy through diversification.
Right.
You can, in the old world, you'd stay wealthy through diversification. Right. Even that's not true anymore.
Right.
And so you find that thing that you have the edge in, that you have high conviction you can deliver, and that you can materially impact the outcome by engaging with it. You go all in on it.
Yeah.
And I've done that 2 or 3 times with the things that I focused on, but there's never been a point in time where the level of conviction that goes with that decision has been as high as it is now.
With Bitcoin.
With Bitcoin.
Yeah.
Because it's inevitable.
And so walk me through that. Walk me through like the crystallization of your Bitcoin orange pill moment. Like what was the accumulation of evidence that made this thing seem so asymmetric to the upside for you?
Yeah, we talked about this slightly briefly before we came on, and it was Raoul Pal in 2020 during the pandemic. I was listening to Real Vision at the time, and this is when Real Vision was a different platform, and it was global macro focused, and it was just starting to explore Bitcoin.
Yeah,
and at that point in time, I got a lot of value from listening to Raoul Pal. He's tremendous on a macro basis, but I listened because I had that background in finance, and I'd always dismissed Bitcoin in the past. As all of us do it until we realize the mistake, and then we kick ourselves.
Until we get it at the price we deserve.
Exactly, exactly. But by going through that, he was going through it at the same time, really asking the questions I wanted to ask. And it got to the point where, okay, there's something here. And even then, even at the end of 2020, I was still thinking about it as a asymmetrical risk reward with a fiat hat on.
Yeah.
It's like, this has a fixed supply and hedges you against monetary debasement. Okay, this feels like a good bet, right? But then, even without thinking about what that then must mean, because it's like unwrapping these hidden layers, because you don't even understand about the energy consequences or the societal impacts or how it changes you as a human being and all of these things. And all of those things you only unlock through time. You've got to do your own proof of work to go down those things. And conviction builds every day, reading, listening, questioning, trying to explain what you think to someone else, and then poking a hole in it immediately. And then you realize that you don't fully understand this thing, and you need to do some more work. Right. But then you reach a point where it's just like, this thing's bulletproof. And it's not like a one day to the next thing. It's just this gradual accumulation, and it begins to change you. And then you before you realize it's bullet point, you think this is just the greatest trade of all time.
Yeah.
And then, once you realize it's inevitable, there's no point spending time on anything else.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just telling you exactly
Yeah.
the same process that everybody else is on at home as well, because they're at various stages of this journey.
Mm-hmm.
And you can see it in people.
For sure.
You can see it in people, like people who've achieved that level of
Mm-hmm.
like Jeff Booth, or there's another friend of mine who I won't name, but they've just reached this level of just like Zen.
Yeah, that's very sad.
It's Zen. Because it's like, I'm not going to give the system any of my energy anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And I feel like I'm almost there, but I still have to interact with the system. Because, if you want to also try and pull people along, you want to make sure there's bridges exist.
Sure.
Which means that, you can't just go off in your own direction and do other things.
I read this wonderful book while I was going down the Bitcoin rabbit hole, as it tends to do. It introduces you to lots of books. You get, especially when you start interacting with Bitcoiners, you get all these new and interesting book recommendations. And this one's called The Role of the Individual in History. Okay. And it's written in the late 1800s, Russian author. I don't recall his name. Short book, really good though. And at some point he talks about the paradox of freedom, where we think of freedom as like this expansion of the set of options in front of us, right? Mm-hmm. That we, as they say, there's many paths to the top of the mountain. So it's like establishing the most possible paths for yourself to the top of whatever mountain you so choose. That's kind of the traditional notion of freedom. But in seeking to establish that optionality, if you're lucky, you will find the one path that you can't not take.
Yeah.
And then you somehow, all of your options and all of your life and all of your energy and all of your focus collapses. It's like quantum superposition, right? Like once the action happens, all the probability wave collapses into the actuality. And it's like that becomes your definitive path, your defining path, the thing that, you fuses with your identity and makes you who you are, right? It defines who you are across your life path. And I really feel like Bitcoin has just been dropping that paradox of freedom bomb on so many people, myself included. It's like, here I'm in the fiat structure trying to make money, and then Bitcoin, becomes one of the extensions of the things that will help me make money, and then start having a business around it. And eventually it's like, I'm across this event horizon and I'm in this whole new world where like, I don't want to do anything other than promote the success of this thing. Not because it's making me money, like it still is making me money and that's great, but it goes deeper than that, right? Yeah. It's like you get into all these other aspects of, you liberate yourself financially, then you liberate yourself philosophically, liberate yourself intellectually, and then all of a sudden you become this, I don't want to say a zealot, but we're very strong advocates for this new economic paradigm, socioeconomic paradigm even. And it's been just an amazing ride. Like I don't regret any of it. I feel very fortunate to have found that thing that you can pour all your curiosity and energy into, and it just keeps yielding.
It's so motivating, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's like a bottomless pit of energy that comes from it.
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, there's a couple of things you said that, like the financial liberation, and it comes back to what we talked about earlier, having these sleeper agents effectively all over the world. There is a point in time where the Bitcoin price goes up enough that they are all liberated.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
And
once it becomes fuck you money, they don't care what their boss thinks anymore.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Exactly. Which is another nice consequence of the system.
Yeah.
Of Bitcoin. Right. Think about all the thousands of people around the world who get to go through that change that you've been through. Right? And then the capability that you then unlock. Mm-hmm. It's a bright future to hope for, isn't it? And it's going to happen.
Yeah, and it is very anti this kind of pandemic situation we just went through, right? Where you have the state censoring people, which actually induces other people to self-censor, right? People don't speak their minds because they live in fear of being censored online or otherwise. And Bitcoin's the opposite, right? It's like, as you're financially liberating these people and they get more of this fuck you money, like they're much more apt to speak their mind. And that's the world I want to live in. I want to live in a world of people that are self-actualized and liberated and working on the things they really care about. Because to the point you repeatedly emphasize in your video, that's the world where people are really creating things of high quality, right? They're doing things they want to do. They're working on projects that they really care about. You know, it goes beyond skin in the game and gets to like the soul in the game category. That's the world I want to be in, right? Like those are the products and services I want to buy from people, where people are pouring their blood, sweat, and tears and soul into these things. Like that's the world I want to live in.
It's what's going to happen naturally.
Yeah.
It will. It's inevitable. It's inevitable.
How do you counteract it? Like, so you say the inevitable word, which again, it's like I agree, but I also think it's a dangerous word in a way, because I don't want people resting on their laurels. How do you counteract the person that's just, you say it's inevitable and they say you're completely full of shit, Bitcoin's a Ponzi scheme, it's going to zero. Like, how do you deal with that mentality?
Everyone finds it in their own time. And I think a lot of those responses are, people say that when they're closed off and often for other reasons. You know, they're not at the right stage in their life to have some other aspect of what they know challenged. Because you never know what people are going through in their personal lives, or these struggles. And, you know, that is the system I live in is a lie, is quite a cornerstone to, you know, it's a leg of the stool you kick out from under someone. If you know the stool is already wobbling, it's not necessarily going to land very well. But I think one of the things we struggle with as a group is that we lose the ability to communicate back to people when we're so far down the
that's true,
down the rabbit hole.
We forget what that beginner's mind was like.
And also I think you can reach a stage where you've tried so much with people, you sort of realize, you spot the warning signs early that it's a lost cause at this moment in time. Because we spend so much time trying to orange pill people. It's like banging your head against a brick wall with some, because of various reasons. But I think it's like any market feedback mechanism. It's like you gradually learn who's well positioned to have that conversation and the best form of delivering that message to them at the right time in the right way. It's I think you need to be specific rather than general with, you know, hammering everyone with the same thing. But it's like any, I was going to say sales process, but that's not, you know, it's not what I mean. It's a market feedback mechanism. It's understanding your customer. Sales might be, but definitely it's an argumentative process, or a dialogical process of discourse. You know, you're making a point basically, right? Like, here's how this works, guys. I'm not here to sell you my Bitcoin, but I'm here to tell you, like, if you don't buy Bitcoin, you're going to suffer, basically. And from a personal perspective now, these conversations become so easy. So I'm like, let me just send you a video. So please just watch the video. And if you don't like it, tell me why and we can talk about it. If you do like it, come and talk to me and we can talk some more.
That's great.
And so there's a conversation either way. And what's really nice is that people actively come back with completely the wrong pre-existing programming. And then but they say, I don't understand why, how can this be true and this be true? And then you're like, well, that's not true. And then you help them deconstruct it, and they feel like they've made progress.
Right.
And so I feel like the video is helping a lot of people. And I cannot tell you the number of nice messages I've had from people. And I get them from all over, and they're just some like really strange or unusual ones. And it's where people feel like they've made a giant leap forward.
Yeah.
In a conversation they've been having with a specific person. Like, I've been on at this guy for like 3 years. He's always ignoring me. I sent this video, and then he sent me back saying like, how can I buy Bitcoin? Or,
wow.
You know, I sent it to my mom, and now she's, you know, she's saying like, F the government, or, you know, something like that. It's like opening up relationships within families as well.
Yeah.
Like there's one I loved, where somebody sent me a really long email about how he shared the video with his teenage daughter, and he'd always felt that Bitcoin was this separation within the family, because he was so passionate about it, but nobody else could see, or nobody else could understand why, and he was having trouble communicating that to them. And then he showed her this video, and then after they had he said, the best conversation we've ever had. And now she understands why I'm so passionate about this thing. And it's like, that's amazing. Yeah. That's amazing. Like, if we can just help everyone just get to that starting line, it makes such a difference. And it's not just more people will buy Bitcoin, number will go up, it'll eat the world fast. It's just like quality of life for everybody.
Yes.
Like, in the family gets better.
Yes.
And so it's very rewarding. I would love everyone to see it. And, you know, if people have seen it, then thank you very much for I'm talking to the audience. Thank you very much for watching it. And, you know, if you shared it, thank you for sharing it. Please share it with other people. Send it to everybody. And one thing I would say, Robert, is this hasn't really broken out of the Bitcoin bubble yet. I mean, given how it started, and it sort of just naturally.
How long has it been?
4 weeks now.
Yeah, so it's still got a lot of runway left.
Yeah. But it's all natural. Like, there's no economic model here. It's
very Bitcoin-esque in its promotion strategy.
yeah. Well, it's costing me money, not making me money, should we say? But there is no way to monetize it, and so it's open to everybody. But it hasn't broken out of the Bitcoin bubble yet, and that's what we need.
Yeah,
we need to get people who are not Bitcoin first sharing this.
Yeah,
right. And so I've done in the last week, I've done the first non-Bitcoin related podcast, which was an entrepreneur's podcast. The audience never had somebody on there talking about Bitcoin before. And it means that we get to reach a whole new audience, that you get to frame this whole thing in a manner which resonates with the people on the other end of the microphone, other end of the speaker, should I say. Yeah. And, you know, there's going to be pockets of sufficiently close communities around us where this thing is going to land really well. And I need to try and find ways to get into that.
Gotcha.
Like, if I go and, you know, if you try and jump too far, it's just going to be, it's accessible for everybody, but it's going to resonate really well with particular groups. So I'm hoping, you know, over the next weeks, months, we can begin to sort of pierce the outer layer of the Bitcoin ecosystem and get into normie world, because that's where it's really needed. It's where it's really needed. So, you know, people at home, send it to your normie friends.
Yeah.
Send it to people who can distribute it to other normie people. and we just get the conversations, and then you'll end up getting back a bunch of questions about, right, how does this work? What do I need to do, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the things that I've been trying to do, and totally honest, I put the video out and I didn't think many people would watch it. And so I just connected the website to my inbox. And then I was like, oh, if somebody emails, I'll just reply. And then I've got the video out there and it's nice. Hopefully somebody will watch it. And then my emails start exploding. I was like, oh no, like how am I going to stay on top of all these things? And so I was playing catch up for 2 or 3 weeks, but now I've got some systems in place, got somebody helping me that we can get back to people, I've replied to everybody. If I've missed you, mail me again, because I think I've replied to everybody. And we've been focused these last 2-3 weeks on building out the materials into all the languages. So awesome. On YouTube now, even though the audio is in English, there's 25 languages translated into native subtitles, all from Bitcoiners around the world.
Amazing.
People have got in touch and say, I speak this language, can I translate it for you? Absolutely. Here you go. Here's the file.
25 languages in 4 weeks.
Yeah, and there's another 6 or 7 in flight at the moment.
It's a beautiful thing about the Bitcoin community.
It is. Bitcoiners are amazing. Yeah. But this is, it's like support for things which align with the cause. And so now we've got all these out on YouTube, and now we are producing all the materials. So the slides, the speaker notes, and the transcript in each of the languages. So we open sourced English 2 days ago. So that's now, you can go to the website, you can download the slides, you can go and give the presentation to your friends and family in person if you want with the speaker notes. You can cut up the presentation, take bits of it, remix it, make it 5 minutes long, 10 minutes long, whatever you want. But go out there and orange pill people with it. We launched Spanish yesterday. When this goes out, we'll be talking about the past, but German's going out today, and then French and Russian the next couple of days.
Awesome.
So we're going to do every language with subtitles in. We're going to do all of the slides, everything. And again, it's all volunteers, right? And they're all accessible for everybody via the website on a Creative Commons non-commercial. So do what you want. Do what you want. If you can monetize it, great, come and have a conversation. And then we can find a way of turning this into something which is has more reach.
Yeah.
Because I would love to be able to find a way that we can monetize this in a way for the community, so that I can bring people in to help grow even more.
Yeah.
Right. But it's not a commercial. It's not a commercial thing.
Right.
And so my hope is that this just becomes a decentralized effort. And now we've opened up created an X community. So for people who are really motivated, who want to give presentations where they are, or offer to give presentations to other people where they are, because I can't be everywhere and other people can't be everywhere, or create new things, and join the community and share it with everybody. And then we end up with a load of great orange pilling material, and people share and make connections in whatever corner of the world. And hopefully we connect some of these sleeper cell agents everywhere. And hopefully we can get some momentum going. And I am just then part of it, not the blocker in the system.
Yeah.
And so
that's fantastic. No, I mean, it definitely deserves to reach far beyond just the Bitcoin echo chamber, because it really is, I mean, deftly designed, right, to get normie to the rabbit hole in 30-ish minutes, 40 minutes, whatever it was. I think it does a great job. And,
thank you.
You know, with your blessing here, we're going to play it here at the end of this episode. I would love that, for the audio listeners, there's a lot of video components to it, so I'd recommend watching it rather than just listening to it.
Yeah.
And hopefully this helps amplify this piece of content, because it's just an excellent, succinct way of, getting people to the problem, basically, right? And at least introducing the solution. And that, that's even the reason I named this show What is Money, right? It's because I was of the same philosophy that you've got to get the problem between your ears first, before I can tell you anything about Bitcoin. Like, if you don't understand what the corruption of money is and how it has negatively impacted the world for centuries, then there's not a lot I can tell you about Bitcoin that's going to be useful, basically. And you're similarly just presenting the problem in a very palatable, accessible way. So that's a very important endeavor.
Well, thank you, and I appreciate the support from everybody and everyone in the community. This is for everybody, and so please treat it like you own it, and get it in front of everybody, and then we can bring inevitability just that few days closer.
Amen to that. I think that's a beautiful place to bring it to a close.
Okay.
Thank you so much for doing this, and thank you so much for coming all the way to Miami to talk to me.
Well, I was thrilled to get the invite, so thank you very much.
Hey Joe.
Hey.
What's this all about?
Well, we have a problem, and it's a very big problem. And unfortunately, most people aren't aware of it. It doesn't matter what your personal views are, your politics, your religion, or where you are. And once you see the problem, you can't unsee it. It's like a one-way door. But thankfully, we also have the solution. And it's this solution that I'm so passionate about sharing. And it's what makes me just so optimistic for the future. The challenge I find, though, is how can anybody fully value a solution unless they understand what the problem is? And so I put this presentation together for some friends, and it assumes no knowledge other than just being a human being with some life experience. And they encouraged me then to make this presentation into video so I can share it with everyone. So I hope you enjoy. Welcome to What's the Problem? So what is the problem? Well, too many, unfortunately. I probably could have written twice as many things down on this slide. I think we all have that sense of unease. We all feel internally that things are not moving in the right direction in our lives, in the world. Like things are becoming harder, not easier. And I think for most of us, we would recognize some elements of these things on the screen as touching our lives directly or indirectly. And what I'm here today to show you is that all these things may seem unconnected, but they're really not. The primary cause of all of these is the quality of our money. Now we're going to do this through a story. So imagine there's this far off world where you have hundreds of smart people traveling on a ship. And this ship gets wrecked on a deserted island. This deserted island is so far from everywhere else, they're effectively cut off. But the island is resource rich. It has everything they could possibly need to rebuild society. But because these people have come from an advanced civilization, they know exactly where they're ultimately going to get back to. But now they're starting again with nothing. What's also clear is that they need some way of trading with each other once they start to rebuild. So they prioritize deciding on what to use for their new money. And suspend your disbelief slightly further in that they have, despite not having anything, the ability to create whatever monetary system they want with whatever characteristics. So the first question they need to answer is, what makes good money? And there are 7 things. So these guys have the ability to create whatever they want. So instead of just creating good money, they create the perfect money. And the perfect money is scarce, which means it has a fixed supply forever, and is instantly and costlessly verifiable by everybody. So if everybody can check it whenever they want at no cost, then you can verify for yourself that nobody's creating any extra. It needs to be portable, so you can effortlessly move and store it with negligible costs. It needs to be divisible, and the perfect money would be infinitely divisible. It needs to be durable. It can't rot or go off. It can't deteriorate. So the perfect money exists forever. It's fungible, which means every piece is forever the same as every other piece. It needs to be acceptable. So everyone, anywhere, can both send and receive. And the really important one is it needs to be censorship resistant. You hold it yourself. Nobody can take it away from you without your permission, and no one can stop you sending or receiving it. So this is great. They decide on perfect money. But then there's a disagreement. Two leaders emerge from within the population. The first, Satoshi, he says, well, given these are the characteristics of perfect money, that's going to be true today, true tomorrow, and true forever. So we should lock them in, you should never change. Whereas Fiatello, he says, well, I get that. I get this is the characteristics of perfect money, and I totally agree. But what if there's an emergency? What if we need to change something? What if the people we put in charge of our money feel like it's not working and need to make an adjustment? I think we should have the perfect money, but we should also have a big red button, which allows someone to press it and change any of the characteristics if we need to. Of course, no one ever will, but just in case. This becomes an irreconcilable disagreement. So a fairly drastic solution, but they build a huge wall right down the middle of this island. And on one side, they create the currency called Satoshis, which is perfect money always. And on the other side, are Fiatellos, which is perfect money, but with the option to change it. Now this wall is so big, it cuts off the communication and the trade between both sides on the island. So effectively, they're cut off from one another. So to begin with, nobody has anything on either side of the island. So everyone's starting from zero. And initially, people have to be self-sufficient. Each person is fishing for their food, cutting down trees for the wood to make fires, and also for houses, and then they're also building their own shelters. Now, even though they have perfect money, there's very limited trading here because people are working hard just to satisfy their day-to-day needs across all of these goods. But people are different. Some people are better at some things than others. And so people quickly realize that if I spend my time focusing on the things I'm good at, I'm reducing the amount of time I spend on things that I'm poor at, then I can contribute more to society. I can increase the amount of goods I can provide to society in the same amount of time as the average person. So the woodcutter spends all his time now cutting down wood. He stops fishing, he stops building shelters. And because he's spending his time cutting down wood, he increases the quantity of wood available to everyone else versus 3 people spending a third of their time each, because he's good at it. And not only does the increase in the quantity of wood available reduce the price of wood for everybody on the island, the quality is also high. He's better at doing it. He produces a higher quality output. So prices fall and quality increases. And not only that, he's not the only woodcutter. There are multiple woodcutters. So they're all competing to supply wood to everybody else, and they're competing at price and in terms of quality. And now what happens is, because the woodcutter needs other goods to survive, he has to sell the wood to buy fish, he has to sell the wood to pay for the services of the home builder. So now everybody is actively trading in this perfect money. Now, because processes continue to improve, the woodcutter can now satisfy the needs of the rest of the population for wood in a smaller amount of time. He can then take that time and think about his own processes, his own innovations. Maybe he can make cutting down wood even more efficient. And if he does that, it drives prices lower. It drives quality higher. Maybe he reaches the end of his innovation within his woodcutting and then uses the excess money and excess capital he has to invest in other people. Maybe he lends it to the fisherman who then builds a boat to increase the amount of fish the fisherman can catch for everybody. So what happens over time in a free market with perfect money, prices go down forever and quality goes up forever. So what people see on both sides of the island is that the purchasing power of their money starts to increase. Goods cost less tomorrow than they do today, so the price of tomorrow is lower. The purchasing power of both currencies is increasing at about 3% a year. And this lifts the quality of life. Life becomes cheaper and cheaper over time for everybody, not just those people who are most productive in society. But the key thing is the money itself is becoming more valuable over time. That is, until these guys come along. So now, because the society is growing and the population is growing, both sides of the island elect a government. Now, it doesn't matter if the government is left or right, big, small, up, down, doesn't matter. They are all the same when it comes to this. Now, however well run the government is, inevitably it will hit a deficit at some point. And that means it's spending more than it's receiving. And that could be through mismanagement, but it could just be through external circumstance, like a natural disaster or something like this. The causes are not important, but it will happen over the course of time, inevitably. But now we see a divergence across both sides of the island. Satoshi, he only has two choices here. To balance the budget, he needs to either raise taxes or cut spending, or maybe a combination of the two. Whereas Fiatello, he has exactly the same choices, but he also has a big red button. And the important thing here is they're both up for re-election. And Fiatello knows that if he raises taxes or he cuts spending, it's going to cost him votes. So just this time, he decides to press the big red button and print a little bit of extra money for the government. Okay, so what are the consequences? Well, for Satoshi, not great. He cannot hide those changes from the population because they're paying more in taxes or they're getting less back from the government from its spending. So he loses the election. But government reduces in size naturally. So now overall, the efficiency in the economy is increased. But not only this, the social balance is improved within the economy because people now realize there is no free money. Taxes need to balance spending. But the important thing is prices continue to fall and quality continues to increase. Now for Fiatello, great news, he gets re-elected. And to start with, it's consequence-free. Like he thinks this is the greatest thing ever. I get re-elected and there's no downside. But something's changed. So what's happened? Fiatello's pressed the big red button, which has printed some money for the government, which has debased the currency. So what does that mean? He's increased the amount of money in the economy overnight. But he hasn't increased the amount of goods and services available in the economy overnight. So now there's more Fiatellos washing around compared to yesterday for each piece of the goods and the services. And this has three major impacts. The first is a distortion of price signals. The second is that it increases input costs for businesses. And the third, it leads to asset inflation. And that first one, distorting price signals, well, prior to Fiatello pressing the big red button here, all price changes in the economy were purely a function of demand and supply because this was a free market with perfect money. But what's happened now is that money has entered the economy not to everybody equally or even in proportion to the amount of money everybody holds. The money has entered the economy via the government. And it enters via the government into the accounts of companies and people connected directly or indirectly to the government. So what Fiatello starts to see is price increases in certain parts of the economy. So the signal to everybody else in the economy is that there's an imbalance of supply and demand just in these sectors. So you see a misallocation of capital by the entrepreneurs in the market caused by the money printer. But not only that, it's human capital. It's smart people, it's active people who are trying to be productive, get sucked in closer to the government and not servicing the rest of the economy. The second is that business input costs increase. Now, every single business in Fiatello's country has at least a human being and some raw material inputs like energy or even some harder raw materials. Now, because the costs of these things have gone up, these businesses now need to try and change something about their product to maintain the small profit margins that ensure that they can continue in business. Now, the first and most obvious one is just to pass on the price increase to the customer. The second is to keep the price the same and the quality the same, but just shrink the product. So instead of having 100 grams, it's now 90 grams, but for the same price. Or the third one is to reduce the input costs. Now, this is where consumer inflation comes from. This is the only source of consumer inflation, is the money printer, causing businesses to make these changes. But if a business passes on the price increase outright, or it shrinks the product and the customer now just needs to buy more of it to satisfy the fact that they needed 100 grams, not 90 grams. Both of those things reduce affordability. So the population is becoming poorer. They're going to have less disposable income, despite buying the same as what they bought yesterday. If instead the business chooses to keep the price the same, the size the same, but just reduce the cost, the most obvious thing to do is just to fire people, which leads to unemployment. And now there are fewer people with jobs, which reduces the overall affordability for the population in Fiatello's world. But not only that, now the government's got a second issue it needs to solve. How does it help support all these people who are recently unemployed? But the most insidious way is for companies to reduce their input quality. And so what Fiatello starts to see is there's a rise in obesity across the population, because the food that was previously fresh and had high quality ingredients is replaced with ever lower quality ingredients and more industrialized sludge. So this leads to obesity. It also leads to a myriad of secondary health issues, which causes a health crisis. And now the government has to step in and figure out how it needs to support all these people who are now unhealthy. The third is asset inflation. Since Fiatello pressed the big red button, asset prices have been going up. The stock market goes higher and higher and higher. House prices go higher and higher and higher. He thinks I'm some sort of economic genius. But they're going up in price because he's just created more Fiatellos. So anybody who knows that there are more Fiatellos in the system, of course, wouldn't sell their asset for the same as they did yesterday. They would take into account the fact that there are just more Fiatellos in the system. So this is what is driving these prices up. But this asset increase is good for the people who own the assets, but not for the people who don't. So he has a wealth inequality begin to emerge across the economy. And not just that, because house prices are now more expensive, the rent is more expensive. So he sees increased levels of homelessness. And this increased levels of homelessness, guess what, require more government intervention to try and deal with. And now asset prices are flying, the stock market's on fire. The prevailing perception across the population is, why would I not invest? Why would I just keep the money? I should be buying the stock market, I should be invested, I should be buying a second home to rent out, I should be buying speculative assets because they never go down, they just go up. If I don't invest, I'm a fool. And because the assets are going up, the banks are pushing ever more leverage for people, pushing bigger and bigger mortgages to individuals, to loans to companies. But now that house prices have gone up, and now that everyone has more debt, at the same time as families are struggling with affordability of day-to-day life, it's now much harder to buy a house. So families where previously they could have one main earner and afford to buy a house with a mortgage can't anymore. You now need both parents working. Both parents working to afford the mortgage and afford to live. And when that happens, people spend less time together, and you start to see the breakdown of the nuclear family. They spend less time with their children. They can afford to have fewer children. Now, because you have decline in birth rates, Fiatello starts to see a change in his demographics across the population. Fewer children are being born, whereas the older generations are living longer. And he now starts to realize that the promises he made to these older generations about being able to retire at a certain age or having a good quality of life or defined income in their retirement can't be delivered upon. For those not lucky enough to be able to buy a house, who are maybe stuck renting. Whereas before, they could think about renting the same place for 3 years or 5 years because the rent goes up too much every year. So now they're thinking about 1 year, maybe 2 years. You're planning less for the future. Maybe you're putting off getting married, putting off having children. You start to prioritize today at the expense of tomorrow. People see that they're saving their Fiatellos never gets them anywhere because the asset prices are going up too quickly. They'll never be able to buy a house. So if you never be able to buy a house, then prioritize living your best life and going on a holiday and spending more, enjoying yourself. But for those not fortunate to be in this position, for those that every day is a struggle feeding themselves and their families, housing themselves and their families, they're stuck on a treadmill of decline. Now, every day is harder, which leads to a growth in addiction, various forms of addiction, including opioids across Fiatello's island, which leads to yet more of a health crisis and yet more intervention from the government. And all of this leads to a mental health crisis across the population. And now the government finds itself in a position where, because it's pressed the big red button, it's created a whole range of secondary issues that now it needs to step in and try and solve. And because it has to step in and try and solve these things, it means the government needs to divert more capital to these areas of the economy, which again is a greater misallocation of capital, which pulls more entrepreneurs into the wrong parts of the economy through the distortion of the price signals. And between the increased leverage in the economy driven by the banks and the misallocation of capital, it sows the seeds of the next emergency. And Fiatello has only one choice, and that's to press the big red button again. And now he's starting to realize that actually this wasn't consequence-free. But now he's lurching from crisis to ever bigger crisis. He presses the big red button, which debases the currency, which leads to bigger government and more involvement in everything. And now not only is the government bigger, but the government has spawned a series of parasitic industries attached to it. Big pharma, who are increasingly involved with the government to try to deal with the symptoms, but not the causes of the various health crises, never incentivized to actually cure a patient, just to treat them long term, because a healthy customer is a lost customer. Big food pushes for ever lower food standards across the economy. The military-industrial complex pushes for ever greater spending on defense, both at home and on foreign shores. Wall Street are up to their eyeballs in debt and now so leveraged that the government wants to protect them. They can't be allowed to fail, because if the banks fail, the population loses their money, the government falls. The government also continues to make unproductive investments. Investments trying to deal with the secondary issues it's created, but also investments driven from whatever political ideology the government has. And all of these things are effectively now crony corporatism. It's very hard to see where the government ends and these industries begin. The success of the government is deeply intertwined with the success of the industries. These industries start to ask the government to become regulators. You need to regulate us to protect the public. But this regulation, all it does is make competition harder. The 1, 2, 3 companies in each of these areas are now very, very close to the government. They supply the people for the regulator. When the regulators end their tenure, they go back and work for these companies. It stops smaller companies coming in and competing with them to then supply the government on better terms or with higher quality product. So quality starts to decline and prices start to rise, which of course is great news for these companies because profit margins go up. What happens then is the media gets captured. The government is teetering to maintain social stability. It's now protecting these industries at the expense of the population rather than the other way around. And because of this social balance that it needs to maintain, it can't allow free speech, dissent, alternative opinions, or questioning of anything that undermines the legitimacy of the government in any way. Not only that, the biggest advertisers for the media companies are the companies connected to the government. So the media companies increasingly don't want to upset their advertisers. And when you have a captured media and a military-industrial complex fomenting strife on foreign shores, you get the creation of the forever wars. And the wars themselves are actively supported by the Fiatello population because all they see in their media is that we have to do this because it's the right thing to do. And between the forever wars and the banking system bailouts and the excessive debt, it leads to the next emergency, but this time it's just so much bigger. And the only choice he has is to press the big red button again. But this time it's different. It's a massive erosion of trust. Every time he presses the button, more and more people become aware of what is happening. And this goes round and round and round until something breaks. And now Fiatello's starting to get quite worried. So what's happening to the money? Well, instead of increasing 3% a year in purchasing power, he's now losing 7% a year because he's printing 10% a year of extra money. And not only that, he's undermining the productivity in the economy by distorting all the price signals. So what happens to the Fiatello Island population? Well, the poor, who are on fixed wages, have very low income security and no assets. They can't win. They just get poorer every single year. For the middle earners, who have fixed salaries and mixed income security, They're not the first to be fired. They often have a home, but they can never sell the home and realize any gain because you've got to live somewhere. If you sell one home, you've got to buy another home. You might have some investments, but they are becoming the new poor. Well, surely the wealthy are doing well. Their income is largely from asset yields, from operating businesses or investing. Their income security is high because they can't get fired. But for them, it's death by 1,000 cuts. They see their wealth as a number continue to increase. But they feel like they're getting poorer. Life continues to get harder. And that's because the rate at which they're earning money, their yield on their assets, is below the rate at which Fiat is printing money. So they're slowly having their wealth siphoned away by the politically connected. Those that are government funded and have fully insulated income security. And perversely, their income goes up and becomes even more valuable as society continues to decline because the government needs more and more intervention. And it's really just industrialized theft at this point from everyone else in society. But now so much time has passed that the wall down the middle of the island starts to crack. And it starts to crack in such a way that both people and money can start to flow from one side to the other. So on the one side, you've got the Satoshis increasing their purchasing power at 3% a year. On the other side, you've got the Fiatellos that are losing 7% purchasing power every year. So what happens? Why? What Fiatello starts to see is that money and people start to leave because they don't trust their ability to save using Fiatellos. They want Satoshis. Okay, so this sums it up. On a Fiatello standard, your money is stealing from you. Whereas on a Satoshi standard, the whole world is working 24/7 to increase your purchasing power. But now the escape valve is open. People realize they can't save in Fiatellos, so they start selling Fiatellos to buy Satoshis. So the Fiatellos decline further in value, triggering yet more budgetary and currency crises for Fiatello to deal with. And the only choice is to press the big red button again. But this time, printing money is not enough because value is leaking out of Fiatello's side of the island. He needs to change another characteristic of perfect money, which is to remove the censorship-resistant nature of it. So the Fiatello population used to be able to hold the money themselves. Now Fiatello says, no longer allowed to hold it yourselves, you have to put it in the banks. The banks are going to hold everybody's money. The population now feel that they are guilty until proven innocent for making any transaction. The banks will check every transaction to protect you. Which means when people are trying to buy certain things, including Satoshis, the banks now say no. It's because of this, it's because of that, it's because of the other. He restricts the flow of capital out of Fiatello's side of the island. He may even just create explicit capital controls. You're now no longer allowed to buy Satoshis at all. But people always find a way, and more people are waking up to what's happening, and the cycle continues. But the important thing is the wealth and the people flee to the uncorrupted money. And now Fiatello is beginning to really panic. So where does it end for Fiatello? Well, if he's lucky, with sustained inflation, allowing the government to inflate away its debts and slowly siphon away the wealth of the public. This may even border on hyperinflation. I say lucky because it's very hard to do that and maintain social cohesion, and something is likely to go wrong. It will definitely be asset seizures. Now that all the money is held in the banks, one day Fiatello will decree that we're all in it together, and the banks will hand over a proportion of that capital to the government. Just like in Cyprus in 2013, if you held over 100,000 euros in the bank overnight, 45% of that went to the government. The public was effectively bailed in to bail out the banks and the government from their own mismanagement. It also happened in the US in 1933. They made gold holdings for the individual illegal. And this lasted for almost 40 years. If you held more than $100 of gold and you were caught, $10,000 fine or 10 years in prison. And this is when $10,000 was a huge amount of money. Fiatello sees a rise in political extremism on both ends of the spectrum. The government never explains to the population where these problems are coming from. They don't tell them it's because of the money printing via the big red button. They control the media. The government is protective of itself. They don't tell the population the truth. They don't help the population join the dots. They don't explain the link from the big red button to the issues. They blame it on the greedy businessmen, or the billionaires, or that foreign dictator, or this or that. And then what happens is people ask for more help and more support from the government to deal with all of these issues, until the only solution is the government's involved in everything. So at every step of this journey, the solution to all the problems has always been more government involvement. And so the people see these problems and vote for more government involvement to solve them. Or something worse. But in all scenarios, people want to hold Satoshis and not Fiatellos. So if we go back to that list of 7 characteristics of perfect money, Fiatello only changed 2 of them. The other 5 are still exactly the same. And look where he ended up. Now, the reveal. And some of you may be slightly ahead of me here. The US dollar is just a terrible version of the Fiatello. So the US dollar is corrupted on the same 2 key issues that the Fiatellos were. But on the other 5, it's materially worse as well. In terms of portability, it's easy to carry, easy to pay, but it's not great for merchants. You pay instantly, but the merchant doesn't get the money for multiple days, and that's if there was no fraud or chargebacks. It's divisible, but only to a point, and removes the ability to do microtransactions, which will unlock potentially completely different economic models. It's durable in digital form, but we have cash component, and that cash component is constantly undermined. The notes are reprinted in terms of design every 15 or 20 years, so there's no ability for an individual to save outside the banking system. If you put notes under your bed or under the floorboards and leave them 25 years, they're worthless. Those types of notes have gone out of circulation. So you need to take the notes every 15 or 20 years to the bank, hand them in, and get new notes. They re-centralize everything periodically out of choice. They're fungible, which means every dollar is the same as every other dollar until it's not. Some countries around the world have already introduced what are known as CBDCs, which are central bank digital currency. But effectively, it's programmable money. A specific dollar may have an expiration date. You need to spend it before this period of time elapses, or else it disappears. Or a dollar may have only specific use cases. You must spend this dollar on X or Y, or you must not spend this dollar on A, B, C. The dollar is very acceptable around the world, but you can't pay for it everywhere. And typically, most national currencies are only acceptable in their own country. And the US has a major Fiatello problem. This is the budget for 2024, the budget, not the actuals, which of course were worse. But deficit of almost 2 trillion on a spend of just over 6 trillion. That's a loss in 1 year. Now, to put that in context, they'd have double the amount of individual income taxes for everybody in the US just to balance that. And on the cost side, they can make some improvements, but there are some key things there you just cannot remove, like the debt interest. And the consequences, well, this is a chart of the amount of money in the system in dollars and the amount of debt issued by the US government over time. Now, I've labeled 1971 on here because that's when the US came unilaterally off the gold standard. Prior to 1971, you could give your dollars back and receive gold in return. Nixon took the US off the gold standard and every currency in the world followed. And since then, it's allowed the US to print unlimited amounts of money to satisfy its own needs. And the red chart on the left-hand axis shows that amount of money is now 22 trillion. And on the right-hand side, you've got the US government debt, which even a month later, this chart is now out of date. It's now 36 trillion. And this doesn't include the unfunded liabilities, the amount of money the US government has committed to pay at some point in the future through Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. But it hasn't had to write the check yet. Now, depending on how you calculate that, it's between 50 and 200 trillion on top of 36 trillion of debt. The only way to solve that is more money printing. So the money printer is systematically destroying the purchasing power of the dollar. Now, you may think I have something against the dollar. I absolutely don't. The dollar is the best that we have. I would love to be able to use the dollar, as would the vast majority of people around the world. But unfortunately, most people just aren't as lucky. This is the performance of all the other currencies versus the dollar over the last 10 years. Some have near enough disappeared completely, and some absolutely have. They've ceased to exist. The people who saved their economic energy in those currencies have seen them vanish. The unfortunate reality here, as the wonderful Lynn Alden repeatedly says, is nothing stops this train. There is no way out for governments. The only solution is to keep pressing the big red button. And so the conclusion is a quote from Hayek, who was an economist of the Austrian school, is that the history of government management of money has, except for a few short happy periods, been one of incessant fraud and deception. And he said this in 1988. Now, that would all be pretty depressing if there wasn't a solution. But thankfully, there is. The only solution here is the separation of money and state. The government cannot be allowed access to a big red button. And Hayek again, and this time the quote's from 1984. I don't believe we shall ever have good money again until we take it out of the hands of government. We can't take it violently out of their hands. All we can do is, by some sly, roundabout way, introduce something they just can't stop. Brilliant quote. So I hope now, with these links between the big red button and the money printer and all of these issues that we see in our lives today, that it's now much clearer that if we can fix the money, we'll fix the world. And the good news here, and this is the best news, is that Satoshis are real. And even Fiatello is now a convert. The solution is Bitcoin. One Bitcoin is 100 million Satoshis, in the same way that $1 is 100 cents. Now, you may feel you know about Bitcoin already because of something you've been told by friends or you read in the media. I would encourage you to start again. When we derive our information from media or people who have derived their information from the media, and that media is connected to the people who own and benefit from the money printer, it tends not to be necessarily the most accurate information. So don't trust, verify. Come to satsversusfiat.com. We've set up a website which helps people get up and running. If you're just getting started, maybe even never heard of Bitcoin before, come, sign up, and we'll send you some information so you can learn about it for yourself and make your own decisions about Bitcoin. If you're further along and maybe even call yourself a Bitcoiner already, then amazing. This is not a commercial enterprise for me. This is a charitable one. And so any support from within the Bitcoin community or further afield, I would love to receive. If people want to give this talk themselves to their friends or just share it more broadly, or even volunteer to give a presentation as part of our group, then just get in touch. And the third one is inviting us to speak. We want as many people as possible to see this presentation because the information contained within it about what the problem is so important. So we'd love to speak. If you have us at schools, universities, industry conferences, events, or even at workplaces if people are interested to learn more. So please just get in touch. Here's the QR code which will take you directly to the website. Alternatively, if you are on X and want to come and say hi and join the conversation with us, then please do. Firstly, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. Please share this with anyone you care about. And if there's one thing that you take away from this, is I hope you will remember that if we fix the money, we'll fix the world. Thank you.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this episode, click here to find more just like it, and here to find our most recent episode. Also, make sure to like this video to help shine light on the corruption of money, and be sure to subscribe to this channel to stay connected.